Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Kushina regrets disowning Naruto part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. It was July the 23rd. The sky was clear, the sun was high, the clouds were white and dwindling around lazily, without a worry in the world, letting the wind carry them over the Hokage's monument, that sported 3 faces, the one of the first Hokage, the one of the second Hokage, the one of the GG, as an overactive blonde called him, and the one of the current Hokage. On that day, a blonde spiked boy stood next to a raven-haired one, and with a small, but adorable pout, made his best puppy eyes. The other boy stared with a slightly nervous tick mark on the forehead, before sighing, and splitting in half the popsicle he had, those types of popsicles that had 2 wooden sticks, and that usually were meant to be shared. The first boy, the blonde one, smiled with a happy grin, grabbing it and starting to suck on it, while waiting, together with his friend, for one of their parents to come and get the 2. The next year, we're going to be 6. And at the academy, Naruto pointed out, as the Uchiha rolled his black eyes, with a sigh, and maybe you'll find yourself a fan club, so you'll stop being this downbeat, he added, as Itachi shook his head. Oto-san told me that Uncle Moto committed suicide last night. He was drowning in despair. A sorrowful look appeared on the face of the 5 years old. He was born on the 9th of June, a fact that made him the elder among the 2, something that Naruto had more than once used for his own teasing. But that actually seemed to mark a great deal the differences between the 2 boys. Firstly, one was dressed in bright orange clothes, with a pair of goggles strapped around his neck. He had orange trousers and, had he actually been a ninja, without a doubt he'd have been the first casualty in the recently ended Third Shinobi War. His clear blue eyes and blonde spiked hair clearly resembled those of his father, and his cheeks sported 3 whisker-like marks that, coupled with his father being the 4th Hokage, had meant he had his very own fan club, since the age of 1. He was pretty sure his mother was to blame. To claim Kushina Uzumaki was a fawning mother would be to claim the Arctic wind was mildly breezy, and by fawning, it actually meant that Naruto had more strange, animal-like pajamas than any other normal boy would actually have, and there were pictures that, he could swear on Kami, had been taken with a brief distance of a second one from another, in such a way that he could actually flip them all and have a film ready, displaying things like his first day in the pool, his first walk, his first word. Why take a picture for his first word? He actually had no idea about that, but he didn't want to point that out, for fear of having his own cheeks pinched repeatedly, with claims of how cute he was when pouting. The other boy, on the other hand, Itachi Uchiha, had a serious look, a calm and collected attitude, and seemed mostly at ease, not acting like a child. Having the Uchiha deployed en masse for the war, and having many died in the protection of Konohagakure, it was to be expected that he'd grow up mentally. Seeing clansmen, cousins, or family friends die made that effect on one's mind, especially when some died after the war, the grief, the guilt, the atrocity of the war still seemingly fresh in their mind. It hadn't been a pretty war. Destructions, villages having to be completely razed, children and women killed without a minimum of piety. He hadn't obviously seen it, but he had felt the change in some of the survivors. It was subtle, at first, just a saddened glance now and then to some children, or maybe an awry smile to a pregnant woman, or things like that. Either they turned back to near normality, with the help of others or through the use of the drink of forgetting, sake that was, or they didn't, and usually they either degenerated, or they more than likely fell prey to their darkness, and committed suicide. Sometimes they brought their sons and daughters with them, other times they simply left the village and were found in the forest, their eyes crushed by their own kunais, maybe in an attempt to erase the memories, or the things they had seen. Itachi had felt all that, and seen all that pain, and for that, he had no longer an ounce of respect for warmongers, and hadn't he an actual need to train and learn the art of warfare, for clan's duty, he would have outright stopped going into any weapon shops, refusing to even speak with the weapon dealers. He had yet to awaken his Sharingan, a feat that some of the clan never managed to, as it was something of a fickle thing, the so-called most powerful Dijutsu of Konoha, that however had a random chance of actually appearing, and sometime it never did. He wore a plain green shirt and plain brown trousers, and just as Naruto had pointed out, had a serious face on, something that no 5-year-old boy should actually have. How do you drown on despair? Naruto queried, perplexed. Wasn't despair an emotion? Could someone actually drown in those things? It's a saying, Itachi replied with a sigh. For all the good their mothers had for one another, the fact that both Naruto and him were waiting just outside a clinic was reason enough to warrant a sort of twin brother bonding between the 2. Considering both their mothers had ended up pregnant nearly at the same time, one actually in the process of giving birth on said day, and the other, the red-haired woman, at her 7th month of pregnancy, meant only one thing. Both knew perfectly well how it sucked to be in their houses, or near them, especially for Itachi, in the next hours. Firstly, it would be loud yells, coming from hell itself, and then it was going to be baby talk. Hours of baby talk. Not only to the actual baby, but also claims of how being a big brother was going to be an extremely important and serious business. Still, Itachi did have it in him to be a reliable big brother. He did make practice with an unpredictable knucklehead of a blonde boy who seemed more than able of throwing himself in utterly dangerous and insane situations. First time they had met, Naruto had nonchalantly walked into the Uchiha's armory and had set off an explosive tag. Only Itachi's reflex had warranted the sole destruction of his mother's favorite potted plant, instead of the entire complex. Something about the boy being able to walk inside a most high-security level area, while wearing obviously bright orange clothing, had made him more than interested in keeping an eye out for him, that, and the fact that he was fun to hang out with, especially with the war and all. Once more, the sounds of the hospital doors opening took both of the boys' attentions, as it had been for the past 2 to 3 hours, and there, standing with a bright smile, letting her blue eyes settle on both kids, stood the red-hot habanero of Konoha, the tomato, if one wanted to die a painful death by calling her with that nickname, the one and only Kushina Namikaze. The woman grinned for a minute or two, before exclaiming out loud, "We've got an Onizen and his Ototo now, Tebane." Itachi's eyes widened in shock, from the good news, as he and Naruto got up from the bench they were sitting on, moving closer to Kushina, while the blonde boy, with a grin, gave a friendly punch to Itachi's shoulder, before saying in a loud and cheery voice, "That's awesome, Tebeo." The next moment, a knuckle hit on Naruto's head made the boy whimper, as Kushina, with a fake frown and a nervous tick mark, gritted her teeth while muttering, "I've got to fix this way of speech right now, Tebane. Ouch. Ka-san." That hurt Tebeo. Another hit on the head, before it actually became an affectionate ruffling, as the red-haired woman didn't actually put any strength behind her knuckle hits. "Well, Itachi-kun, stop gaping like a fish and get inside, your mother's resting, but she wanted you to see your baby brother." As Kushina smiled at the now elder brother, Itachi nodded, dashing off in the most polite way he could come up with, which meant swiftly walking until the doors of the hospital closed behind him, before going on a mad dash through the corridors, avoiding as many medics and nurses as possible, while heading to his mother's room. Meanwhile, mother and son stared at one another with a sort of knowledgeable grin. 5 minutes later, Itachi came out with a sort of embarrassed face, and, as both Namikaze laughed, Kushina told the poor boy the number of the room his mother was in, making the Uchiha depart once more, as the two, the blonde spiked boy and the red-haired woman, chuckled for a long, long moment. "You've been eating a popsicle? Even though I told you not to spoil your stomach for lunch?" Kushina suddenly asked, her eyes slightly narrowing as the air around the two turned tense for a moment. "Me? Ka-san, you know I'd never, ever." As Naruto said that, he had already begun taking a single step backwards, only to be swiftly bundled by chakra chains and being held like a sack by his mother, carried all the way to Ichiraku's Ramen, recently opened, which had a really vast assortment of ramen types. As Kushina smiled, having already become a usual customer of the stall, Naruto kind of hoped his mother would now drop him. "Namikaze-san, salt ramen as usual?" Tucci queried, as his daughter I.M. turned a puzzled look out from behind the counter, to stare at the sort of chain cocoon that was a pouting Naruto. "Ota-san! Naruto-kun is turning blue!" I.M. exclaimed, with a worried face, her light brown hair already tied in a ponytail, as her dark eyes stared with a mixture of worry and perplexity at the boy, as Kushina sighed, letting her son free, and sitting next to her. "If you spoil lunch again, I'm having you try on that new pajama I bought, you know, the tiger one?" At that, Naruto paled. He would rather die in shame than ever wear something that had an actual tail, though it did make I.M. giggle, as the girl already had a, clearly devious, mind for imagining certain things. "I.M., get back here, you need to start learning how to chop vegetables correctly for the soup." As Tucci said that, the girl nodded, as the man took Naruto's order of pork ramen, and just as the blonde boy was about to go itadakimasu on the food, a hand ruffled the boy's hair, as another blonde, wearing white robes with a flame motif at the base of the mantle, and a sort of wide-trimmed hat with the kanji for fire on it. "I knew I'd find you two here." My wallet was crying tears of pain after all, as the fourth Hokage, Namikaze Minato, spoke with a grin. Kushina stuck out her tongue in a childish manner, before actually showing from one of her inner pockets a toad-like wallet. "I didn't think he could cry, you know." As the woman chuckled, Minato's face paled in shock. "Now then, Kushina-heim, please don't go overboard. You know that the Hokage's stipend isn't as high as what many people think," the man replied, trying to catch the toad-shaped wallet back, only to find it always out of reach, seeing how Naruto's full-out didn't care, as he stood there eating ramen. "Ota-san," Naruto said after a while, having finished his own bowl, "do you think I'll have an Ototo or an Emuto?" he queried, looking with a hopeful gaze at his father, as the man in question coughed nervously, before replying, "Well, we won't know until the cabbage patch has grown enough to." "Ota-san!" I.M. exclaimed, "Wasn't it the stork that brought kids?" Tucci silently turned his gaze to the cooking broth, starting to whistle, seemingly trying not to take notice of the Hokage and his daughter entering a verbal fight on who, what, or how actually brought kids to be. Such a nice memory it would be, in the years to come. 2 years later, Naruto woke up, slowly letting his hand move under his pillow, to grab his kunai, hidden in there. Then, without a second thought, he flung it straight ahead of him, at the person that had entered his apartment. His small one-room apartment that he had been relegated into after the events that had led him to become the most horribly hated individual in all of Konoha. After all, he harbored the Kyuubi in him, now. A silent prisoner, as he never heard him speak, not even once, but the seal on his right arm, the kanji for iron, as that was the seal on his shoulder now, showed off as the proof of who he was, no, of what he was. The person in question deflected the flying kunai with one of his own, and in a moment, Naruto was flung out of bed and onto the floor, groaning. Naruto-kun, you know you should be in the academy, right now? The boy's voice was that of Itachi, who shook his head slowly, as the blonde-spiked boy got on his feet, slowly massaging his sore right arm, that had taken the blunt of him being brought on the ground, to the side of the bed. I hate those stares, Naruto replied, biting his lip, and I hate knowing they are right and staring at me like that, he added, turning to look out of the window. Hataki-san's still out there, isn't he? He asked, as Itachi nodded in reply. He's going to come in 5 minutes, if you end up late for your exam. Usually, to graduate from the academy one would need at the very least 6 years. Entering at 6 and coming out at 12 was the cue. One would think he'd be more than happy not to have 2 people smashing his own record of graduation from the academy, Naruto bitterly replied, as he got to dress in one of his third-hand clothes, a stint brown jacket, with a dark shirt underneath, and dark green trousers, with pale brown ninja sandals. Hataki-san graduated at 5 years old, after entering the academy at 4, Itachi replied, and he does take pride in having his private student graduating in 1 year too. The raven-haired Uchiha pointed that out, as the blonde-spiked boy finished grabbing his pair of dirty goggles, letting for a brief second the fingers tap on the plastic borders, the plastic protection long gone from it. They crashed against the wall heavily. After all, the anger wasn't something that was going to disappear by magic, only by not thinking about it. Not only had he been deprived of his family, but he had also been kindly suggested to move to one of the apartment for orphan kids. He had nodded. How could he not nod at the Hokage's suggestion? How could he not accept the fact that it was for his own good? It still hurt, knowing that, after all, he had been forced into that very same position without even giving him a chance to decide. He was barely 5 years old, and suddenly he had to act like an adult. No father or mother to turn to. No sister either, for what it mattered to him. So the goggles crashed against the wall of the one-room apartment, repeatedly, with strength, until they finally cracked and broke. But that didn't stop him from keeping it up, until a small bump on the wall told him he was spent. He had no more energies, he had nothing more than the tears and the sweat from the effort running down his face. He wasn't a boy any longer, and he wasn't Naruto Namake's any longer. For all effort and purposes he was the hero that jailed the Kyuubi within himself. Well, when it's either sink or swim, one doesn't have much of a choice, Naruto muttered back, his eyes moving towards his ninja equipment, that he carefully checked, not really wanting to go to school, but seeing no other way to move forward. He knew it would turn badly, he had a hunch, and his hunches were the sole thing that had made his first year as a jinchuriki bearable. When he had gone out the first time, his hunch, a nagging pull to the stomach, had been the sole thing that had made him actually run from the lady that usually smiled at him, and that always stopped him and his mother to speak about how he was such a pretty boy. That had saved him from getting a knife in the chest, a sure one-way kill, as the woman was a butcher, and knew perfectly well where hearts were. He had taken it in the back, however, but except for a sharp fit of pain, and the lady getting handled by some Uchiha guard, it hadn't even left a scar, and since no one in the hospital actually took his time to look at the wound, he simply sat there for a while, before finally deciding it had already dried off and he could go back home. Pain not mattering to him, he was a big boy then he had to be. He was the hero that jailed the Kyuubi. Anyway, I'm ready, Naruto muttered, as he moved to leave, followed by Itachi. Not having breakfast? The Uchiha queried, closing the door of Naruto's apartment behind him, just as the blonde boy scratched the back of his head, and sighing, grabbed a chocolate bar from one of his trousers pockets. That's unhealthy, Naruto-kun, you know you could come over to the Uchiha's compound, mother said. Itachi-kun, Naruto spoke, letting his gaze divert towards the boy, it would only bring more ill will around. Your clan has already been forced basically outside the village. I'm not going to let it get any worse if I can avoid it. As he took a bite out of the bar, he groaned, spitting it to the side. Should have suspected it was laced with poison, he muttered, seemed too good to be true, laying on the ground like that in the park. As he slowly took the stairs to descend towards the road level, he trashed the chocolate bar in the bin, before letting his blue eyes dart towards the nearest fruit stall available. Itachi moved next to him, nearly reading in his mind. Naruto-kun, you shouldn't create troubles, you know? Naruto nodded, as he kept on walking, but he did subtly distance himself from the stalls, and actually moved towards the middle of the road, which actually emptied itself when they realized who was trudging in the middle of it. Itachi Naruto sighed, looking to his left side, and just as the Uchiha did the same, curious as to what would make the boy sigh and turn in that direction, he realized too late the one on his left side was a mere hinge, and the one on the right, biting onto an apple, was the real one. We better move before the stall vendor comes over. And with that, he dashed off towards the academy. He's unpredictable, that much is sure, the Uchiha sighed, for how much they called him a prodigy, a genius, a dashing man. Naruto was something else, and sometimes, better, he was unpredictable. Where Itachi passed his tests because he knew he could, after simply studying 1 hour, Naruto didn't need that, but he passed them nevertheless. Itachi knew the secret all too well, and it wasn't anything grand, at all. The boy knew how to move around the academy, especially at night. He'd be the best infiltration specialist around, once grown up, probably even umbu material. Itachi should have suspected that much since they were young. After all, entering highly restricted grounds in bright orange clothing only meant that, once ditched those clothes for dull ones, he'd literally become a sort of unseen shadow. The academy furthermore couldn't compare to being homeschooled. Sure, Itachi had the clansmen, but he didn't rely on them too much. His father was too prideful to allow his firstborn to show any weakness, and thus his skills were actually honed through practice, but mostly through self-improvement. Naruto didn't mind asking. The first times, he got shot down repeatedly by people who viewed him as the QB. Some of those people actually had firstly declared they had no problem in private teaching some things to Itachi himself, but wouldn't budge a finger, claiming a really tight schedule for what concerned Naruto. The few people who actually did help the blonde spiked boy, however, were worthy of all the hundreds of Uchiha clansmen around and the senseis of the academy. Only 5 minutes with people like Hatake Kakashi, the famous or notorious, depending on the nation, copycat ninja, were worthy more than any sensei at the academy. Even a single minute of the third Hokage's time was more worthy than any days of training non-stop with the Uchiha clansmen, and even better, his favorite pupil, Orochimaru, had taken a sort of interest in the boy, much to the dislike of his actual pupils, who however, never voiced a complaint. Itachi was a prodigy, a genius, an Uchiha hailing from the #1 clan of Konoha, the very same clan that, together with the Senju clan, founded the village in the first place. Naruto wasn't a prodigy, or a genius, but he knew humility, and only with that, and a good dose of headstrong determination, he had managed to be on par with Itachi himself. The difference didn't stop there, however. The raven-haired Uchiha wanted to become a strong ninja because he wished to protect the village of Konoha from harm, as he believed, strongly, that it was the duty of any shinobi worth his salt to protect the weak. Naruto's reason was because he had been asked to become a civilian. The Hokage had the guts to say he should take on the road of being a civilian. That was the condition to return to the previous living agreement. He could go back to his home if he stopped being a shinobi to be. An untrained jinchuriki wouldn't be much of a use as a weapon, but it would make him safer for the village. He could always be trained later on. The later on part was what had made the boy feel the hunch once more. There would be no later on. It would either be then and on the spot or it wouldn't be ever again. He wanted to know why, he wanted the truth. A truth that, the man's word had been those very same, was only for the Hokage's ears. That became his purpose, to become Hokage for the truth. Still, he didn't like going to class. The stares of the children, of the orphans especially, had carved deeply into his skull since the first day. He only had Itachi to watch his back, and the Uchiha knew all too well the caring nature of the boy, so much like his friend Shurshui. Both cared for others more than themselves, though the latter had unluckily chosen to keep with his friends in the academy. Not that he blamed him. Even taking to Naruto was a social stigma, something that Itachi had to fight through since the first moment they had set foot in the class. The class had been cheery, a lot noisy, and many were already seated. The rolling call began with earnest. At his name, Itachi Uchiha, the boy had winced, raising his hand. He had winced because he hadn't heard Namake's coming as the surname, yet he was pretty sure that N came before U, unless the alphabet had suddenly decided to take a turn for the worst. Maybe they had skipped the name because the boy wasn't there? Still, he couldn't believe they hadn't called his name. Maybe they had swapped his class. Maybe they had sent him on a sort of special training, instead of the academy? That's when the name actually came from the teacher, the name that wasn't Naruto Namake's, but Naruto Uzumaki. The sensei took a brief moment to look around in the class, and in that precise instant, the door opened up, and Naruto, wielding an orange-covered book, one that the sensei knew but that he, and the rest of the class didn't, walked in, raising his arm to signify he was there. Then he sat in the furthest away corner of the classroom, leaving a dumbstruck class, and an utterly puzzled Itachi. Even the sensei had no idea what to say or do, and thus, did nothing. Naruto didn't come with books, or paper to take notes, he didn't even come with pens. Always with the orange-covered book, and as he walked in only when his name was called in the roll call register, and that he dashed out first things first at the sound of the bell, he was an elusive target, at best. Recess was the weak point of his plan, as the boy silently retreated to a corner of the school's area, and stayed there until the bell rang again. Nobody dared to get closer, nicknaming it the Demon's Den, nobody except, obviously, and Inuzuka hell-bent on getting a piece of him for killing her cousin. The girl had stood no chance. Itachi winced, recalling how Naruto had shown the girl just how nasty his tricks could get. He was a prankster by nature, but an actually cornered Naruto. Itachi shuddered at the thought of how the girl, the Inuzuka, had gone crying the next moment. No Inuzuka had ever cried that hard. No Inuzuka was ever thought to be able to actually cry. Yell, rant, and scream? Yes, and yes, but cry? That was what quality over quantity meant. Naruto had a lot of qualities, and with good enough purpose, brought forward by good, if not extraordinary teachers in the nick of time they could spare him, he had been on par with him. Itachi finally reached into the academy, watching as his fan club was waiting for him, and narrowing, just so slightly, his gaze, when he realized there were a bit more people than normal, around the school. Many walked like ninjas in their own accord too, so they were the parents of the graduating class of the year, A bit strange, since there were no particular clans showing up in the crowd of faces, or because something else was actually going on. Itachi inwardly sighed that his Sharingan hadn't awakened, or he would have certainly peered through whatever machinations were going on, as he would have placed his hand on the fire to swear on it, but he was sure that it involved Naruto. The Uchiha reached the hallway, where, reading the orange book, Naruto stood in silence, as both he and Itachi knew full well how it would be going on. Itachi would enter the classroom, and be probably greeted by the fangirls who he had in his own class. Naruto would wait outside until the teacher began the roll call, and then the boy would enter at the right time for his name to be called. Once more, Itachi was forced to bath under the attention of foaming girls, one worse than the next, until he finally got to his seat, thanking Kami that the Inuzuka girl, Hana, wasn't the slightest interested in him, and had 3 dogs nearby who growled savagely at the rest of the fan club. You should pay up the protection fee, one day, the girl pointed out, with a neutral tone. It will be over by tomorrow, Itachi replied, letting a small smirk appear on his face. As on cue, the surname Uzumaki was called, and the door opened. The smirk slowly turned to a frown, and the frown to worry, when the man entering the room was not Naruto, but another sensei, Mizuki. Itachi Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki are to follow me towards the examination room, he reported, in a clear tone. Well, the exam to immediately be promoted from the academy seemed to have been settled for the early morning. Itachi got up in silence, letting the fangirls wail tears while actually cheering him good luck. The worry on his face turned to perplexity, upon following Mizuki, as Naruto wasn't, at all, outside the hallway. Nor was he in the exam room, where Irika, on the other hand, was. I haven't seen Naruto Uzumaki today yet, is he sick? Mizuki queried, feigning clearly, something that Itachi had no trouble picking up, interest in the boy. Few people actually took the boy's health by heart. One was his mother, Mikoto, who even though she usually fussed over Sasuke, now 2 years old, had no trouble fussing also over her friend's son. He had been sick once, for a single day, but that too hadn't stopped him from going to school. There was just something about him that made him incredibly resistant to sicknesses, jinchuriki or not, but he had been sick once. Result of poisoning, as it had been discovered later on. He'll come when you roll call his name, as Itachi replied that. Both Irika and Mizuki nodded, and then the first coughed a moment, to clear his throat. Well, to graduate academy you need a bunshin, a henjin, a kawarimi. That's more than enough, usually, because we have written tests marks over the course of the years and taijutsu practices to look and grade. Since we do not have those, in this occasion, I'm going to require you to do the above jutsus, spar with either me or Mizuki, and finally hand in a small written test. Afterwards the same will apply with Uzumaki-kun, if he'll grace us of his presence before you finish. Otherwise, he'll be marked as a failure and, unluckily, be dropped out of the shinobi program altogether. Itachi's eyes narrowed at the implication. There was something off in Naruto's disappearance, if that was the case. The boy was dead set on being a shinobi after all, and for him to be actually late, or not there, was something bizarre. He'd take time for his friend, that much was sure, but he did have to voice his opinion. Senseis, Naruto had been in the academy even before me, Itachi muttered. There's no way he wouldn't be here now. I think something might have happened to him, he added. Well, he's probably gone to the bathroom, Irika replied. The teacher didn't outright love the blonde boy, or like him, but he had been the one to testify Naruto's ability for taking the test earlier. Probably to remove the fox demon from his class, at least, that was what everyone thought. A pity Naruto's skills were the real deal. I see. Would you mind if I took the written test first, Irika-sensei, Mizuki-sensei? Itachi politely asked, letting his gaze move from one teacher to the other, and, as both senseis nodded, he was made to sit down at an empty desk, and given the paper, he was told the time limit, 2 hours. This was the start of it. He could simply scribble some notes in pencil, wait the last 5 minutes, and write on pen. He knew all the answers. It was an easy thing, so, for that reason, he waited, hoping the boy would come in. Naruto didn't come, at all, after an hour. He didn't come even after the second hour was just about to end, and Itachi found out begrudgingly that he was forced to write by pen the answers, neatly arranging them on the paper. Then it was the taijutsu spar, in which he did his best to hold out against his opponent, Mizuki, for as long as he could. Obviously the Chunin was stronger than him, and more apt than him, but still, he did his best, bringing the fight on for at least a quarter of an hour. As the two opponents made the sign for peace, after the spar, Itachi was a nervous wreckage of a boy. He knew something was wrong, and he was pretty sure it was something big, yet the two teachers seemingly hadn't even cared to look for the problem. Just where did the boy end up? Just where had Naruto gone? Did the chocolate bar actually poison him? But he had seemed fine, and he had spit it out swiftly. Did something else happen? Was it the people outside the academy? Were they responsible in some way? As the ninjutsu spar was about to begin, someone knocked at the door of the class. It's open, Irika said, having Itachi wait, as the raven-haired Uchiha's eyes were already lit with hope that Naruto was going to explain what was going on. The door slowly opened, to reveal a pale man with long black hair and golden eyes, with a jounin vest on. Next to him, slightly pale, stood Naruto. He seemed to have had his clothes shredded on the side, and on the back, but mostly it did seem that he had received a set of bruises on the face, as one of his eyes was seemingly half closed, already swelling up for the purplish bump. What happened to the boy, Orochimaru-san? Iruka queried, puzzled, and showing, if for a brief second, a moment of worry, soon replaced by simple curiosity, as, after all, it was the jinchuriki of the Kyuubi that they were talking about. He was tougher than that. Kakuku, it seems this young shinobi had been taken by a group of rebels within Konoha, but as luck wanted it to be, I happened to find him and his torturers. He insisted in coming to take the test to become a genin, albeit, the eye being stressed, with a happy grin, can assure you that he should indeed be made a genin, even without taking the test. That would be unorthodox, Orochimaru-san, Mizuki replied. The sensei did hate the guts out of the boy, for some reason. Well, the reason was obvious, but he hated the boy even more than normal. Anyway, I'm sure you won't mind him being late. It wasn't his fault, after all. Kakuku, and, with a final chuckle, Orochimaru turned to leave, leaving Naruto to slowly limp towards a seat. His right leg seemingly had taken a bad twist somewhere. Seeing your condition, maybe you would prefer to take the test tomorrow? I'm sure we could explain to the Hokage, and he'd understand, Mizuki proposed, feigning worry, as Naruto instead shook his head. Firstly, he was sure he'd simply be thrown out of the shinobi program without a second thought. Exceptions didn't work for him, only against him. And secondly, I'll take the test today. Tomorrow you'll have already decided the team assignments. If I'm not there, then who's going to take care of the worrywart Uchiha here? As Naruto grinned, sending a wink to Itachi, the Uchiha in question sighed, speeding through all the hand signs required for the jutsus, and muttering, "You know, next life, I'm having you drop out of the shinobi program," Itachi said, as he waited for Iruka to grade his performance. Naruto did the written test without wincing, but small droplets of sweat, and some not yet dried blood did stain the white paper sheet. Then, the boy asked, "Can I do the jutsus first, please?" Both teachers sighed, nodding. They had changed the order for Itachi, while either liked doing the same for the boy. It still wouldn't be fair, especially with Itachi still in the room. The next moment, the kawarimi, the henge, and the bunshins were made. The last one created the bare amount to pass 3, while the henge was a perfect replica of Mizuki, and the kawarimi did however produce a small whine from the boy, not because it failed, but because he badly positioned his right leg when he touched the ground after the substitution. The last part was sparring. Iruka was about to stand up. After all, Mizuki had already fought against Itachi, but the silver-haired Chunin dismissed his friend. "I'll handle him too. It won't be anything more than some light sparring." After all, as Mizuki spoke, he stood in front of the brat, with a small smirk on his face. Itachi looked at the scene with interest, his leaf forehead protector already in his hands. But that fight was going to be far more interesting to watch, and he was sure Naruto was being an idiot. It had to be one of the constant of the universe. Naruto had to be a knucklehead idiot. Mizuki's right fist aimed straight ahead, with enough speed to actually be considered a nearly killing fist, instead of a friendly spar one. The result was a broken nose for Naruto, who, however, wasn't knocked out, his head having at the very least moved backwards a bit before the fist had connected, to lessen the blow. Trying to keep a standing position, with a clearly sprained leg, or maybe even broken, wasn't a small feat, especially when Mizuki adopted a more versatile and mobile approach to fighting the boy, who did all he could to avoid doing his best to duck or parry the blows, albeit his arms had clearly started to turn sore, especially after the couple of hits to his shoulders. Naruto gritted his teeth, pain flaring through his broken leg, as he knew this was what waited him in the test. He was pretty sure he had asked them to be merciless, to be extremely cruel, to be thorough in their actions just to make him fail. Well, he wouldn't fail, he would become the greatest ninja ever, and he would become the Hokage for truth. He should have known that there was no way the Hokage wanted to speak to him outside school, in the backyard. He had thought it was improbable, but he had hoped it wouldn't be a false hope that something was going to change for the better. He had refused his previous hunch. That never ended well. That hope had been shattered by the ninja mob that had forced him to run for his life towards the other side of the village. It had been a perfect ambush, 2 coming out from the school's door, 2 to the side of the backyard, and a couple along the roads that would have possibly led him back into the school, for the exam. He had tried to avoid capture for as long as possible, but in the end, they did have ninjas on their midst, and no matter of training would have made him able to be on par with some of them. He was captured like a rabbit, ninja wire set at the end of an alleyway he had been running through, and then, said alley had begun his bloody trap. He was already holding his hands around his head to protect it. The first thing to protect is the head, the rest of the body is secondary. If you curl yourself up in a ball, had been told to him by Kakashi, once. He had done that. He had stood there screaming for help, until his voice had gone sore. Obviously, the blood in his mouth and the kicks hadn't helped him, or the fact that nobody would have actually moved a hand to help the demon brat. The Uchiha would have, but they weren't there at the moment. The sharp cries of "Die demon! Die!" echoed through the alleyway, until finally, the noise of an unsheathed sword, the simple murmur of the sword's name, Kusanagi, the flashing increase in length of the sword, that cut down his assailants, and finally, silence, only the throbbing pain of his bruises, as he slowly managed to get back up on his feet, or foot, as it was, since the other was broken. broken to try and have him open up from his curled position, to try and make him stop defending his frail head, maybe to smash his skull too. Kakuku, why didn't you fight back, Naruto-kun? Orochimaru had queried then, knowing full well he did give pointers to the boy, more than once. I should be doing an exam, I'm sure he, the boy had spat out the pronoun like it was the name in question, surely would have me detained if I did anything, and make me drop out the shinobi program. Naruto's eyes had then settled on the snake sanin, and, with a sort of pleading gaze, had realized the man's face hadn't been one of frowning, for having been used, but more of satisfaction. Kakuku, that was good thinking, come along, I'll bring you back to school, you have an exam to take, last I checked, and with those words, one of the 3 legendary sanins had brought the boy back to school. A shinobi needs to see underneath the underneath. That was the most valuable lesson of them all. To actually resort to taijutsu was a practice that few deemed worthy of notice. Why was taijutsu learned then? Because you never knew when the kunai you held in your hand would drop, break, or you'd have no time to grab it. Taijutsu for the academy was basic movements of fists and kicks. Taijutsu, real battle taijutsu, was about feints, specific hits, and quick submission holds, but it all followed only one real rule. If it was flashy, it wasn't worthy of being learned and it wouldn't save your life in battle. That was a lesson the Jiji had told him, so, even if he was getting the short end of the stick from Mizuki, Naruto was still pretty much capable of holding off the attacks of the Chunin, not because he could actually defeat the man, but because the man had preferred to believe in the boy's weakness. Underneath the underneath, after all, was the first law. So when, even though Naruto had been battered and bruised, the time kept on going, and he was still up, Mizuki gritted his teeth, resorting to a roundhouse kick on the boy's broken leg, to swipe that smug grin the blonde boy had on him the entire time the spar had gone on for. In that precise moment, the seemingly broken leg had done a side movement, avoiding the kick and becoming, itself, a kick straight between the Chunin's legs. Itachi winced, averting his gaze as he knew all too well the strength that was behind Naruto's kicks. Iruka paled slightly, going as far as verbally muttering an ouch. Mizuki, on the other hand, saw white, and fell backwards, seemingly passed out from the pain. I thought it was broken, Iruka muttered, pointing at the leg. I do have a broken leg, Naruto replied, gritting his teeth, as he got both his hands to support on a nearby desk. It just wasn't the right one, he added, and I knew he'd resort to play dirty. Ninjas should always use the weakness of the opponent, Naruto-kun, Itachi replied. Yeah, that stuff, the blonde boy said, sweating heavily, as he clearly had to be in pain, but did his best not to let it show. Well, I say you passed, Iruka replied, handing the boy a Konoha leaf protector. You did defeat a Chunin, even though it was a friendly spar, and you did perform all henges, and while your test is largely unreadable due to blood loss, it's mostly correct, and you did all this while in your state. It's more than enough. Naruto meekly nodded, making a grin to Itachi, before muttering back, Itachi, I think I'm not going to be able to come eat at Ichiraku's tonight. Warn Hataki-san for me. As he finished saying that, the blonde boy's eyes closed, as he fainted, not sprawling on the ground because Itachi was already there, grabbing him by the side. Should I call a medic, Nin? Iruka queried, worried. He should have been worried in the beginning, but if the boy was able to last till then he probably should have been fine, shouldn't he? He was a jinchuriki, tough demon jailer, and he wasn't all that bad, was he? No, they'd probably try and mercy kill. Itachi spoke slowly, letting the words loom the air for a moment, before adding, he'll be safer in the Uchiha compound where I'll be carrying him, now, and with those final words, the boy slowly began walking towards the door of the class, and outside, carrying his fellow Konoha ninja together with him. For their first day as genin of the leaf, it wasn't that good of a start. He always had the same dream, about the same night, the same events. At first he was happy, his baby brother, or sister, on the way, and then he was no longer in the house, having been smashed by a giant red-furred fox, that had made him really, really, scared, and crying, while his mother held onto him with one arm, and on the other seemed like a crying baby. His father was in front of them, his blue eyes setting themselves on the 3. I'm sorry, there's no other way. Then Naruto had seen him take the bundle of clothes, and he had even taken him too. Why didn't his Kasan stop him? Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she actually wanted that to happen. He only knew he had fainted afterwards, that was all he knew. When he had woken up, the stairs had started. He recalled the stairs in the council, he recalled them all, and even though he did recall them all, he couldn't help but whimper, slightly shaking at the sheer amount of pressure being in the same room as clans had met and spoke, about him, about his future, about who he was supposed to be, or better yet what he was supposed to be from that moment onwards. He woke up with a startled expression, carefully eyeing the room he was in, pain washing all over his body, as he could feel, distinctively, a cast on his left leg, and bandages covering most of his body. His vision was impaired, on the swelled eye, by a cold compress, as his only visible eye made him inwardly mull a thought. Was that how Kakashi-san saw the world? He groaned, recognizing the motif of the Uchiha clan on the side of the paper walls. Itachi had brought him to his family compound. He didn't hate the Uchiha clan, it was the exact opposite. When he had started getting beaten up in public, it was usually an Uchiha guard who broke the mob apart. His friendship with Itachi, who was the heir of the clan, was enough to at least warrant some help, even from those who still loathed him. Naruto, however, also knew of the consequences for helping him. It had been something clear in his mind, and no matter of telling him otherwise had convinced him of the opposite. The Uchiha clan's compound had been forced to be moved nearly outside of the village's wall, a social stigma that clearly still burned into the soul of the Uchiha's clan leader, Fugaku. He tried to leverage on his sane foot, holding back the pain. He was good at that. To keep the pain inside, never to show any weakness that you don't want the enemy to exploit, that was another sound teaching. He kind of wondered, as he managed to get on his feet, if Kakashi was fine. Maybe he had simply been distracted, since having started to read those orange-covered books, there were times he'd let his guard go off, as any 16-year-old would. But he just did that while giggling in a sort of perverted way. He had given Naruto an orange book too, but the boy hadn't actually read it. He just had taken the cover, placed it to protect his hard-obtained school book, and had then walked to class with it every day. He knew that was Kakashi's trick to be undisturbed, and thus he had thought about it in the same way. If he was reading that, nobody told him anything, even the adults avoided him, at least, the majority, and the few who didn't were distracted by his seemingly innocent appearance to let him bunch in his way out of there. It was survival. Everything was meant for survival. Being a shinobi wasn't being nice, playing fair, yelling out loud and charging head-on. It was about slicing throats from the back and punching people in the balls, where it hurt hard, to survive. Grime, blood and filth were the ninja's companions. The rest meant nothing. Naruto's hand slowly moved to the panel door. Try as he did to make it as silent as possible, he knew all too well it would be futile. The next moment, as the door he used switched to the side, the door in front opened, to reveal Itachi, staring at him with his own dark eyes. Naruto, congratulations on passing the genin exam. In the most foolish and possibly idiotical way I had never even dreamed about, was the clear thought pattern behind the Uchiha, something only Naruto, having known the boy for quite a long time, could understand. Though do notice that tomorrow we have team assignments, please. Do take some rest time, and do not try and engage in nightly activities. If you even so much as try and get out of the room, know that I can pretty much stay awake all night, you stupid and reckless idiot, and force you back to sleep by knocking you out, was the clear message. But Naruto tried to reply, only to be cut up short when a woman, in her early years, walked towards the two boys, a frown on her face, as she stared at the two recently appointed genin. I just heard someone saying they wouldn't mind sleeping here the night, right? Mikoto stressed, as Itachi on his own accord nodded. So it seems, Ka-san, Naruto would like to sleep here, to recover from his wounds, that he even refuses to admit. Just look at how much pain his face shows. As Itachi spoke softly, his mother nodded. Hey, as Naruto tried to butt in on the conversation, Mikoto shushed him in a split second, replying, well, you know he can stay as much as he likes here, but I must ask if he's hungry, since he slept through lunch and dinner times. As she replied that, Naruto tried, being the key word, to claim his moment of speaking light, just so he could say he didn't need anything and would be on his way home. He's hungry all right, Itachi replied. I'm sure he wouldn't mind eating something solid, instead of ramen, as always. Itachi Naruto's muttered growl went unheard, as Mikoto smiled, nodding before leaving the two boys there. Due to your physical situation, Naruto, I'd suggest you refrain from any attempt of getting even with me, Itachi replied, for the moment. Obviously now, do go back to sleep. And with that, Naruto rolled his eyes. No use in arguing against one who could actually swipe the floor with him, and that when Naruto was in perfect conditions. At least he'd get some solid, and warm, food that night. He couldn't shop for food, without being kicked out, but that was in his normal aspect. The reason his henge was top-notch was that he actually needed that skill for survival. He had never had a problem in walking up front and asking someone if they needed any help, moving crates, lifting stuff, things that any 5-year-old could do, even mowing the grass of elderly ladies. Obviously, Naruto was shunned, even if the lady in question would later give the job to either a genin team, for a higher fee, or to another kid who'd do it for spare change. That's when he had asked Kakashi for a solution. The man had been more than willing to hire him out for odd jobs himself, but Naruto had refused. He didn't want mercy, he wanted survival skills. So, strangely enough, while he did love ramen, and that warm feeling that the hot broth had when reaching his stomach, he rarely ate it, and when he did, it was a special occasion. The henge had been what Kakashi had taught him, and Naruto had been able to do it. At first only a sort of mishmash of colors, then it had become a person, and finally it had become a different person. Henges required chakra in proportion to the differences from the base form, thus the more complex and different the image required, the better it would be. Chakra control was needed both for the finer details and to make the henge more difficult to trace. It had been the basic henge of the academy, but when you need that to survive it became extremely important to know how to do it well. So, Naruto survived on henge used to make odd jobs, go shopping without being thrown out, and actually to just have a bit of respite in the park, unknowingly training his own chakra control in the meantime. Still, spare change wasn't enough, and that usually meant that, being too stubborn to ask for help from anyone, even Itachi, he had, more than once, resorted to scavenging and foraging. There wasn't a single fruit plant that, left outside at night, survived his passage. Obviously even the farmlands on the nearby outskirts of the village, or the forests, weren't left unscathed. Forests were the best place to hunt, rabbits, birds, things like that. It was practical, and it worked. Sure, usually most stuff was cold, or had to be thoroughly cooked and cleaned, before being eaten, but the satisfaction of eating a morsel of self-caught rabbit? The teeth gnawing upon a freshly taken cabbage? His classmates had bentos, he had the birds' eggs in their nests, his classmates had apple juice, and he had the tap water from the school's bath. All in all, he survived. So, he wasn't one to spoil food, even when he would have preferred being home, the empty one-room apartment that waited him, with no one in there. He simply felt better knowing that there was one door and one window as entry and exit points, instead of the paper-made doors of the Uchiha compound. Heck, he was sure that, in case of a fire, it would all burn up really fast. Mikoto came back with a tray, on which a vast assortment of food was, food that Naruto took no moment to dig in, after the usual itadakimasu, and that gave the woman the time to give a slightly sad look to the boy's face. She didn't know what made her sadder, the fact that the boy harbored a demon, or how he had been treated after becoming the container of the demon in question. Sure, the Kyuubi might have nearly destroyed Konoha, killing a lot of good people in the process, but how was the boy responsible for that? The sweet boy had obviously changed, but certainly not because he had become the nine-tailed demon. Itachi had the pressure of being the next clan heir, and she couldn't fawn too much over him, but still, she had been really glad when Naruto and him had struck a strong friendship. It had also helped her son immensely, especially when Sasuke had begun walking. It was Itachi who seemingly knew where the younger one was, or what he was doing, and when queried on his sixth sense, he had always replied that it was something he had already witnessed. Uchiha-san, Naruto said, after the food, I really should be going, he whispered in a barely audible murmur. Now Naruto-kun, we went over this already, just call me Mikoto-san, the woman replied, and don't you even think, for a moment, of escaping through the window. You have a broken leg, you need rest, and the cast won't be of any help if you keep on moving around, she added. I'll be fine by tomorrow, Naruto muttered back. Team assignments are tomorrow, he added, slowly drifting to sleep. Did he actually feel that sleepy? He didn't bother much about it, and as his eyes closed, he couldn't help but shrug off the feeling that he shouldn't be sleeping that heavily. Moments after finishing his dinner, Mikoto stood up with a sigh. Really, if she hadn't known the knucklehead by heart, she wouldn't have resorted to giving him a good dose of sleeping medicine. The boy would have probably left at night, worsening his leg condition minimum, and clearly that wouldn't have helped him at all. She bit her lip as she moved out of the room, giving a wink to Itachi, who had opened the door of his room once more, only to be updated on the situation, before nodding and turning back to enter his room, to get some sleep. Mikoto's walk didn't stop until she reached her husband's study, where she entered after politely knocking on the door, and closing it after having walked through the doorway. Mikoto? Fugaku queried, perplexed at the late-hour visit of his wife. I'd like to ask why no Uchiha guard realized that Naruto-kun was being severely beaten in an alleyway. Today, the woman spoke quietly, her dark eyes not daring to accuse, but still showing off worry. I can't tell you, Fugaku barely replied in a whisper, his eyes moving sideways. This was the signal that he actually couldn't, meaning the Hokage had a hand in it. Mikoto nodded. Her husband wouldn't actually do something like that for petty reasons, and having his guards not do their jobs only to have a mob hit a boy would have been stupid, and her husband wasn't, at all, stupid. If he wanted to kill someone, Fugaku knew he could count on highly trained Uchiha's clansmen, so there would have been no need to bother with something like that, meaning he had been ordered to have his own men stand down while the beating took place. Knowing he couldn't speak meant something else entirely too. It meant he had been ordered not to speak, and to respect said order one had to be the Hokage. Mikoto's face turned for a moment sorrowful, before shaking her head gently. The boy can stay for the night, Fugaku added. Itachi was smart enough to use a hinge to transform him into a sack of potatoes, to have him enter, but he has to leave first thing in the morning, understood? Yes, husband dear, Mikoto replied, a small smile on her face. Her husband was one of the toughest shinobis that Konoha could ever birth, but he did have a weak spot, one that she wasn't afraid of using. He never liked seeing her sad face. The next day, Naruto's eyes opened slowly. As he felt the uncomfortable weight on his left leg, he recalled the events of the previous day. A bloody way to become a genin, that much was sure. Still, he was a genin now. It was the first step. Wherever through blood, tears, or words he'd strike true to his purpose, to become Hokage. Only then would the truth come to him. As he begrudgingly stood in a sitting position, he took the weight of his body on the right leg, sighing as his left still seemed to pain him a great deal. Not as much as the day before, but he wouldn't be pushing any weight on it that soon. He saw breakfast on a tray, next to him, and sighing, he ate it as fast as possible. He wouldn't renounce food, no matter what it would be or where he would be. One thing he was sure of was that he still had today free. Tomorrow would be the genin test time, and by then, he simply had to have his leg fixed. He valued his options. He needed a medic nin and the medical jutsus to have it at least bearable for whatever the test was, and he did have the money for it at least. He hoped it would suffice what little he had managed to put aside. The problem was with the fact he needed to find someone willing to heal him, without overpricing. That would be difficult, but not impossible. His henge would probably work. Had he broken something on his face, it would have been worse. He slid his door open, sighing as Itachi did the same, with his leaf protector already on his forehead, and another one in his hand, handing it over to the blonde boy. "This is yours, Iruka-sensei gave it to me after you fainted," the Uchiha spoke quietly, making Naruto nod as he took it and tightly tied it on his forehead. "Can I ask you a favor?" Naruto muttered, his voice serious, albeit a bit trembling, as Itachi simply raised an eyebrow. It was a first, to actually be asked a favor from Naruto, which meant it had to be something fairly important. "Whatever happens," Naruto said, "I'll always have your back, just don't leave me behind, okay?" Itachi made a small smile, nodding. "If I did leave you behind, I'd probably be more worried than satisfied. We go through this together, as friends." As Itachi raised his right hand, Naruto caught it with his own, and as both boys squeezed each other's hands, a serious look settled on their faces. "Let's get going then," Naruto said, a smile on his face, as he slightly winced when he inadvertently placed some weight on his still broken leg. "We did wake up early, we have time," Itachi replied with a sigh, as, at a snail's pace, they both made their way outside. They had to be early for the team assignments, and as such, they had woken up early too. By the time the two reached the academy, they both sat, without showing a trace of nervousness, together with the upperclassmen, those who had actually graduated on time. "OHI. A female kunoichi spoke, moving closer to the two. "What are two gakis like you doing here?" The girl had purple hair, tied at pineapple, and her pupilless brown eyes settled for a brief moment on the two, before wincing at the sight of the blonde boy's whisker marks, a fact that only one other person possessed, actually. "Well, never mind asking," the girl said once more, slowly moving out of the way, without even waiting for a reply from the two. "You're a party killer, Naruto." Itachi pointed that out, barely repressing a grin, as the blonde boy simply took on a seriously saddened face, albeit it was fake. You know I'm the soul of every party," he replied, letting his gaze wander towards the rest of the class. Who knows who he'd end up partner with? Itachi would probably have all the luck, as usual, pretty kunoichi, obedient second shinobi. With Naruto's luck, instead, he'd end up with an arrogant ugly hag of a girl and an utterly arrogant bastard who would claim alpha status like an Inuzuka. The teacher, Iruka-sensei, walked in alone, earning Naruto a puzzled expression. Where was Mizuki? Mizuki-sensei is currently undisposed. After yesterday's exams, Naruto couldn't repress a chuckle that was heard both by Iruka, by Itachi who was next to him, and by the purple-haired kunoichi. "OHI. What's there to laugh about Mizuki-sensei being sick, you brat?" "He's not sick," Naruto replied, between a chuckle and another one. "He's probably holding a cold pack over it. Aha." As Naruto began laughing, Iruka sported a nervous tick mark on his forehead, while Itachi sighed. "He will stay in the hospital for the next days, to repair all damage he has suffered from." As Iruka kept talking, a boy raised his hand to ask, "Did he break a bone?" "Ahahaha. I doubt he'd ever break that bone." "Wahuhu. He might have a broken muscle though." Naruto couldn't help but exclaim that, with a wide laughter following, as Itachi sighed once more. "Uzumaki." Iruka snapped, "You are now a genin of Konoha. Please control your outbursts." Fine, another chuckle, and then Naruto calmed down, while the eldest Uchiha slightly shook his head. He knew all too well the boy did that when he was stressed. He'd probably end up with unknown teammates and teachers, so it was only obvious that he'd probably flip out in some way, and Naruto's way to vent off stress was to yell something out loud. Iruka, once silence reigned in the classroom, began announcing teams and their members. "And Kakashi Hatake will be the Jounin sensei of Team 7, Team 8 made of Naruto Uzumaki, Mitarashi Enko." The purple-haired kunoichi from before had her face fall down on the hard wooden surface of the desk, whining about Kami hating her, and Itachi Uchiha. Naruto literally hugged Itachi, nearly breaking the boy's spine by doing said motion, and dropping it after a few seconds, coughing to slightly recompose himself, not before the entire class had outright began laughing at the scene. Silence. Iruka snapped, "And their sensei will be Orochimaru of the sanin." At that point, whines and yells and exclamations raised themselves through the class. Itachi Uchiha, being taught by a sanin? Fine for everyone, even the older fangirls of his fan club. But the jinchuriki of the Kyuubi? That monster? And Mitarashi Enko? Some words were set even on her, a war orphan who had just gotten lucky, and with that, spite came too in her direction, making her actually look uncomfortable, as she had never believed someone could come up with reasons to give her faults on being a war orphan. "Hey Tachi," Naruto said out loud, "you think you can show me that genjutsu you mastered? That one to send a bunch of whining kids crying back to their mothers? You know, the ultra-secret one that only those of the Uchiha clan know how to make? But Naruto-kun, that makes the whining kids die after I use it." As Itachi seriously replied to the boy, even Iruka slightly paled. Did said jutsu really exist? The serious way Itachi had replied to the blonde boy. "Well, anyway, wait for your Jounin sensei to come along, and then off you will go." As Iruka left the now silent as death room, after his words, the first Jounin to actually enter was Orochimaru himself. The pale-skinned man had an amused grin on his face, as he watched with delight the looks of envy from the other students, but he silently noted how there wasn't a hint of pride on either the Uchiha or the Mitarashi. Naruto showed relief, but of that, the man was sure. He had taken an interest in the boy since seeing him actually be taught things by his teacher, Hiruzen. Not much, actually, just pointers, but the boy had absorbed them like a sponge, where others kids in the park played, the blond boy of barely 6 years old was absorbing knowledge like it was air that needed to be breathed by the old man. It had been more than enough to warrant the pursuit of his interests, and the boy was the Kyuubi jinchuriki, and he just kept being interesting, just like the events that had brought him there. Somewhere else. Don't you have a genin group to teach to Kakashi? The Hokage queried. Hokage-sama, with respect, why wasn't he put on my team? Kakashi had been jounin for quite a while now, and he was taking students since a while, so why not assign him one of the few boys he actually could try and teach something? He who? The Hokage replied, raising an eyebrow. Naruto. Kakashi said the name, his only visible eye showing a brief glint of sorrow, as the Hokage's tone turned snappish. Orochimaru of the legendary three wished to teach him, and for that reason, he was chosen. As the man spoke, turning his gaze towards the village, he muttered, barely containing his anger. The boy refused any attempt at conciliation, he insisted on this path. So now he will carry it on till the end. And I made sure that Orochimaru himself shows no leniency towards him, or the rest of the team if he does actually pass the genin test, while facing off a legendary sanin. Then maybe he'll be worth enough of my time to sort out some D-level missions for him. But the silver-haired jounin tried to come up with a reason for such a messed-up judgment call, but couldn't, as the Hokage interrupted him, letting his voice carry over the thoughts of the copycat ninja. Kakashi! He is extremely important to the village, did we understand each other? At those words, Kakashi nodded. Yes, Hokage-sama. As he turned to leave, the door of the office opened, and a woman, carrying a 2-year-old in her arms, entered with a smile. Kakashi-kun, Kushina spoke with a smile, how are you doing? The 2-year-old girl, with red hair, tied in a ponytail, stared with her clear blue eyes at the silver-haired jounin, who took on his smile eye, before replying. Everything is fine, Kushina-san, I'm a bit in a hurry though. I'm sorry I can't stay any longer, see you too, Katsumi-chan. And with those words said towards the shy 2-year-old girl, Kakashi left in a hurry, leaving behind the red-haired woman, who, cooing over her 2-year-old, moved towards her husband, the 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze, the man who had disowned their very own son, claiming he was too disrespectful to be a Namikaze, the man who had thrown him in an orphan's apartment, because he had considered his very own son to be too dangerous to stay around, after sealing the Kyuubi within him, but had nevertheless offered the boy to come back to a loving family only if he refused being a shinobi, the man who seemed to consider Naruto more like a tool, an object, a furniture piece, than a real breathing boy. He didn't know which of the two he hated the most. His sensei for what he had done, claiming the boy should be considered a hero, but nevertheless throwing him out in the streets, or his sensei's wife, for having not lifted a finger to protect her firstborn. He actually didn't know, but he, like a couple of other close friends of the family, had pried for the truth, and hadn't found it, too tightly kept within the mind of the 4th Hokage himself. Just what was it? The truth? Orochimaru had brought the team, his team, towards a training ground. He had taken in the seemingly expressions of Naruto slowly turning darker and grimmer by the second, and had been more than right about his leg being stiff because of a cast. The training ground had a lot of undergrowth, bushes, trees, and was maybe a bit too closer to the outskirts of the village than any other training grounds, but it still wasn't something as bad as the training ground 44. The snake sanin turned around, letting his smirk become evident, at the sight of the 3 genins, 3 naive, little, whiny genins, that he was either going to find something interesting in them, or would send back to the academy without a second thought. Naruto was interesting, that much Orochimaru had been certain of since setting his gaze on him. Itachi was interesting too, being an Uchiha, but without the Sharingan, he was a bit less worthy of notice. The third was a war orphan, a no one, and she was scared. He could feel fear, like any snake would. It was the same fear of the mouse standing in front of its predator, and right now, the snake sanin could actually read, clearly on the girl's face, what her thoughts had to be. That was what made him grin. Maybe he'd keep her around, just to see her scared, senseless face, and if not, he could always mentor the 2 boys and throw the kunoichi back into the academy, or into one of his latest experiments. Present yourself, Orochimaru spoke quietly, crossing his arms over his chest, and letting his back move against the tree's bark. Itachi raised an eyebrow, as Enko too had no idea what the man was saying, but he was a legendary sanin, so maybe he was simply saying something too complicated to be understood. Damn, maybe it was some sort of sensei-ish stuff she should have learned at academy? Maybe it wasn't covered by the second-hand book she had bought. She gulped, nervously, as Naruto scratched the back of his head. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, Orochimaru-sensei, the boy spoke, sporting a small bitter smile. I have no interests worthy of notice, and my sole purpose is surviving while seeking the truth, he added, making Enko's face turn perplexed. What truth was there for him to find? Except him making no sense at all when replying to their sensei, who most probably was going to eat him alive, minimum, for saying such nonsense. Orochimaru simply nodded slightly, before turning his gaze to Itachi, who, following the preset made by Naruto, replied, My name is Itachi Uchiha, Orochimaru-sensei. The boy spoke in a polite and calm manner, his eyes trying to take in the entirety of the snake sanin's presence. I enjoy visiting Japanese cafe, and my dream is to bring peace to the shinobi world. As Itachi actually spoke, the frown on Orochimaru's face appeared visibly, making the Uchiha's face puzzled, as it seemed something he had said had made the snake's sanin wince. Dreams are fickle, Orochimaru hissed. Purposes, objectives, ambitions, determinations, achievements, those are strong things. Ideals, dreams, hopes, those are things for the weak-willed. If you seek something, achieve it. If you cannot, then you are not worthy of being a shinobi. Itachi nodded silently, letting the words echo in his head, trying to make sense of them. What the man was saying was basically that he should simply strive harder, to obtain peace, and not let it be a dream, but an objective to reach. Finally, Orochimaru's gaze turned to the kunoichi in the team, who was slightly nervous, as she spoke, in a barely audible whisper. My name is Mitarashi Enko, Orochimaru-sensei, she said, carefully making sure to say the appellative correctly, and I like conducting tea ceremonies, she added, slightly holding her breath and wait for any reaction. That, however, didn't come from either of the men in front of her. Well, the two young ones didn't know her usually brash attitude at all, and Orochimaru probably didn't care at all. And my don't say dream, and the objective is to become one of the best kunoichi of Konoha, she finished, hoping not to have made the man angry. Orochimaru simply said nothing, not a scoff, a scowl, or a smile. He simply waited for a couple of seconds, and then muttered back, boring. As he said that, the lower half of his body merged with the tree behind him, letting only his upper half show. Well, might as well get this over with. At those words, Naruto winced. Just the worst fear he could suspect of was going to happen right then and there. The test, that should have been meant for the next day, was instead going to be done that precise day. Meaning he'd probably fail, since he did have a broken leg, and would be forced to take it again, the next year. He couldn't permit himself to lose the chance to finally upgrade his meager diet from powdered ramen and cabbages to normal ramen and fish. He also couldn't let Itachi down. They'd both rise together. That was their promise. Enko didn't know what was going on, but did see both Naruto and Itachi tense up, the first moving to grab a kunai. It even seemed a new one. Where did he get the money to buy one? And Itachi taking out a small tanto. With the Uchiha symbol on it, she didn't bring her weapons behind. After all, she didn't expect them to begin training so soon. And why were the two already equipped? Did they know about this before? She had to ask them, eventually, when she got a chance. I will give you 15 minutes of time to hide. Then I will need 5 minutes to capture you. Survive 5 minutes, and you'll be fine. As he said that, he placed on the base of the tree a small alarm bell, setting the time for 20 minutes, as most of his upper body had already merged with the tree. And as his face was the last thing to disappear, he added with a smirk, obviously, if you fail you will go back to the academy. And with those final words, he disappeared into the tree bark. So that was what this was all about, Enko thought, miserably watching her teammates stare at each other, and then looking at her. Yeah, she could understand the stares that they were giving her. The Kyuubi would probably eat her, and the Uchiha would probably tell his clansmen that it had been all her fault. The poor war orphan was going to take the blame for everything, obviously. She gritted her teeth, and was about to bark how they wouldn't give the fault to her, when Naruto simply handed her over the kunai he was holding, letting the cold metal's handle rest upon her palm, that had begun to sweat since the beginning of the test, and that shocked Enko into silence, as Itachi nodded, starting to look around for hiding spots. Mitarashi-san, Naruto spoke, we'll get out of this together, okay? Why was the brat, the 7-years-old brat, calming her down? She was the oldest one, right? She was the one meant to actually take point for experience, yet the two boys, the two 7-year-old boys, were making her feel safe, although they both were smaller than her in height. I don't need you to tell me this, brat, Enko replied with a snapping tone. She didn't actually want to snap at the boy, but all that she got back wasn't a rant, or a yell, just a sorrowful gaze. It lasted for a brief second, the second needed for the boy to probably process the words, and the tone used, and then he was back to his sort of normal face, not a hint of a smile, but neither much of a sad face. Some sort of middle ground between tense and worried. Naruto-kun, Itachi muttered, what's our plan? Hey, since when does an Uchiha ask for a plan from someone else? Aren't you a stuck-up clan of Dijitsu users? Enko asked, since Naruto had taken time to think. That we are, Itachi replied, making Enko's eyes bulge. Did the boy just admit her insult? It was not funny at all to be stuck with two boys that looked too old for their age. She was sure she was going to die of boredom, clearly. But Itachi continued, he is more unpredictable than me, the boy continued, thus he is best suited for planning out. What does being unpredictable have to do with the rest? She queried, perplexed. I've got an idea, Naruto pointed out, but we have to move. Sensei could still be in the bark of the tree. For all that we know, let's walk in that direction. As he added that, precisely within the tree, Orochimaru chuckled mentally. Itachi had undoubtedly made the right call, even if skills made the Uchiha the strongest. Thought patterns were Naruto's forte, and he was unpredictable, and full of surprises, just like the first time he had met the boy. Orochimaru, one of the 3 legendary sanin, who completed S-rank missions without batting an eyelid, and who was currently 38 and counting, had a secret. Not counting the experiments he subjected orphans regularly to, or the kids kidnapped from the streets at night, or the laboratories spread through the world, accessible only to him and those he hired. His deep dark secret was that he enjoyed reaching Konoha's aviary, and taking some of the bird's egg to eat raw. It was his secret. It would be a really sore drop in his reputation if it came out the snake sanin, renowned for his strength and for being a prodigy and a creator of techniques, actually gorged himself with pigeons and hawk's eggs. As he actually entered the aviary in the deep of the night, he heard his heart stop for a moment. Someone was in there. A boy, maybe no more than 6, was there, a straw bast in one hand, and he was deftly, and as silently as he could, grabbing the biggest and obviously most juicy eggs. The boy was hand-picking them, meaning he either knew what he was doing, or he had been doing this for a good while. The snake sanin had silently moved right behind the boy, intrigued as to why either of the 2 guards stationed there had so much but heard him move, and he admired his handiwork. Sure, it was crude, and some hawks had already woken up, but it was also smart. The woken up hawks were left in peace. Those who slept lost their eggs to his hands. Then, in silence, the boy had left through the aviary's window on the first floor, and that had showed Orochimaru his way in, a crude wooden grappling hook, tied to a tightly knitted rope that had been made out of bamboo fibers. He had been a lot interested in the boy since then, especially when he had discovered who he really was. As they slowly made their way out of the area's proximity, Orochimaru smiled, slowly letting his body move underneath the tree, and into the ground, to keep a close eye on them. When the time would come, he'd simply jump up on their backs. He would have eagerly passed them, especially after what the Hokage had asked him to do, that being making them fail. But he simply did what he wanted to do, that meaning, they had to show something interesting to pique his curiosity, if they wanted to become his genin team. It was 3 minutes later that Orochimaru realized the brats were moving towards the village, yet they hadn't said a single word, albeit being a bit worried. The kunoichi had actually reeled in her pride at being the oldest, and had followed the 2 boys' counsel, for all the good it would do to them. Well, they had just marked their own failure. Even if they did try and hide somewhere in the village, it would just make things easier for him to track them down, though he could see the thought process of the blonde boy. Kukuku, if Orochimaru, the greatest sanin out of the 3, can merge with natural stuff, then maybe he can't do the same with concrete. Kukuku, nice thought, Naruto-kun. But it won't work with me. He never said he wouldn't pursue them. He only said he'd give them 15 minutes to hide, and of those, 7 were already taken as the 3 reached the main gate. Itachi, Enko, I can't run to destination, so I'll have to ask you to carry me, Naruto whispered, just as his luck had deemed necessary to have the gates in the rush hour, as merchants carrying their wares made their roundabout trips. What's the destination? Itachi queried. As Enko narrowed her eyes, she wasn't going to play babysitter on the boy. She had even yet to hear about the plan, for Kami's sakes. The boy did gift her of a shiny new kunai, so maybe she wouldn't try it on him, but nevertheless, she wanted explanations, and she wanted them on the moment. Hi. Not now, Naruto whispered, shaking his head. When that wagon moves, you both start dashing. Mitarashi-san, I'm sorry, but could you please carry me? He whimpered. Why would I? You do have 2 legs, don't you? The kunoichi replied while narrowing her eyes. She wasn't going to give out a free piggyback ride. Naruto-kun has a broken leg, Itachi pointed out, and he wouldn't ask you if it wasn't necessary, the Uchiha said. Enko looked for a brief moment, her jaw nearly unhinged, at the blonde boy in question, the boy who was 7 years old, with a broken leg, and broken legs don't heal in one day, that had taken the exam the day before, clearly, and that was now whimpering. He had to be in pain, clearly, and he had kept it all in. Well, so much for having a team of sucky kids. One of them clearly had balls of steel and wasn't a wussy. Fine, but if you grab a touch I'm breaking your other leg, the girl replied, as she turned around, to bring him up in piggyback style. Now what? Itachi, you take point behind to the left. When I say go you throw this to your right side, okay? As Naruto handed a smoke pellet to Itachi, the boy nodded. Why the right side wasn't a thing he was going to question. Underneath them, Orochimaru listened with a sort of interest to the boys' discussions. Did they really think he was working on a site basis? He could feel tremors on the ground, their body heat, their chakra signatures. Didn't they realize he had more than 100 different ways to track them down? Whatever Itachi was going to throw wasn't going to help them, not in the slightest. Then, when the wagon moved, so did the genin group. In that moment, the horse carrying the wagon let their hoofs clop the ground, for a brief second disrupting the tremor sense of the sanin. And, as Orochimaru seemed unfazed, he slowly collected once more the vibrations of the 3 running genins. They were faint, however, and then, after a moment, they were no more. Puzzled, he decided to appear on the street, letting his gaze wander where the brats had gone. Seeing the smoke of a smoke pellet coming out from a side of an alleyway, he nodded at the thought, so the genins had thrown it to the right side and had moved straightforwardly then. What was in that direction? The Hokage's monuments? The Sarutobi compound? Was that their destination? He didn't say anything about hiding into other people's houses. Heck, he only told them they had not to be caught by him in the 5 minutes after 15 minutes of hiding. They were loose, set free. And they were doing their best, albeit it wasn't enough, obviously. He realized they would probably try and hide at his sensei's house, which did have wards for intruders, and would make it tougher for the snake sanin to actually pursue them. So that's where he went, going from rooftop to rooftop. And just as he went that way, in the alleyway, covered by the smoke, stood 3 very still genins, all 3 holding their breaths and keeping their eyes closed. Mitarashi-san smells of tea leaves, Naruto thought, and, after a brief moment, just as the smoke dispersed, the blonde boy whispered, "We head back to start." It was nothing more than a murmur, and, as Itachi nodded, Anko followed. She did witness the boy's decision-making, she just hoped it would work. Orochimaru, on the other hand, reached the Sarutobi compound, and waited patiently. As he couldn't come out immediately, he wanted to wait all the 15 minutes before officially giving chase. He slowly let his chakra prod at the compound's wards, finding an easy weak spot, and starting to expand it to try and pick off where the three could have been hidden. They didn't even seem to be in the compound that looked deserted, devoid of life. Orochimaru-kun, as an elderly voice talked to him, it made him relent from continuing his actions and turn around in the dark alleyway he was in, coming face to face with the ex-Hokage, who was smoking his pipe, while wearing loose black dojo robes. "Care to explain why you're probing my house's security?" "Sensei," Orochimaru said. "I am testing my genin team," he added. "Did you ask them to infiltrate my house, as a genin test?" Sarutobi queried, perplexed. "While I'm sure it would help with team working, there are far too many dangerous wards in there," he added. "Actually no, I had them run while I gave chase. I think they thought it would be smart to hide from me in a tightly secure compound, obviously, if they can get in. So can I, but I don't know how, being genins. They thought they could get in the third Hokage's compound." As he pointed that out, Hiruzen mulled a thought over a puff of smoke. "I did set the wards to allow Naruto in. If he ever needed something, he's in your team, isn't he?" At that, Orochimaru nodded. "Well, I can tell you this much, since I don't want to be unfair. They're not in there, Orochimaru-kun. The wards would have still warned me if somebody had entered the house. And since nobody did, there is no one in there. Seems they managed to trick you." As the old man said that with a smirk, the snake Sanin's eyes narrowed. He wasn't going to be played like a fool. Not if he could avoid it. "I see." As he moved to leave, Hiruzen took one more puff, before letting his eyes wander on the man's back. "Orochimaru, I just hope the news I received about you aren't true. Because if they were just, when did you stop being a human?" The sanin moved backwards, using his highly enhanced senses to track down the three. They had to be somewhere in the village, right? Then he narrowed his eyes. No, he was thinking like any idiotic chunin, not even worth a split second of his time. They were led by an unpredictable ninja, one who could enter the Konoha's aviary, avoiding detection, by self-creating a grappling hook from a broken chair and some bamboo fiber. They weren't in Konoha at all, so the only other place they could actually be would be outside. Now, if I were a normal genin, I'd hide near a river stream, or inside one, to avoid scent detection. Since, however, that's how I would think and thus would be where I would look, they must be in the last place I'd search for them, the starting point. Orochimaru chuckled, as he slowly made his way back, realizing, quite truthfully, that the thought had been dead on. He had been slow deliberately, as he would catch them up in the last 3 minutes, giving them hope, just to take it away, would be delicious. The three genins were precisely there, silent, albeit Orochimaru could smell the fear coming from the kunoichi, the tension, barely hidden, from the blonde boy, and the pretty well-hidden nervousness of the Uchiha. He waited just for a brief second, before finally appearing in front of the three genins, already expecting them to scramble away, or try running. Instead, they simply sighed. "Seems we got caught, guys," Anko said, albeit her tone of voice was shaky. "I told you we shouldn't have believed the brat's words," she exclaimed, grabbing Naruto by the collar of his jacket. "Kukuku, well, it's not that I'm a legendary sanin for nothing," Orochimaru smirked, as Itachi, for once, nodded. "Orochimaru-san, we see there's little reason to continue this. It seems we will be forced to take another year at the academy, since any and all form of fighting or confrontation would clearly result in us being the losers. And with Naruto's broken leg, our attack power has been sufficiently cut off." As he said that, Anko's forehead bulged a tick mark. "What is that meaning?" "Huh? Care to repeat, stick-in-the-ass Uchiha? You mean this brat is stronger than me? I've got the best aim of all my class, and I was ranked third among the written test ranks. Itachi ranked first always," Naruto exclaimed back, still being held by the girl's hands by the collar. "And I was always second, so, clearly, I am stronger than you. Oh, now you're on, brat. I'm going to wipe you on the floor." And Orochimaru's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he chuckled, before outright laughing out loud. "Orochimaru-san?" Anko queried, gulping in fear. "Oh, Naruto-kun, really? You thought this trick would work?" The sanin replied, as from the very ground snakes sprouted to capture the three. "I have you all captured now, so I say you can go back to the academy. And look, you just had 30 seconds left of time." As he said that, pointing at the alarm bell, Naruto's turn to smirk came into view. "Sensei, then I'm really a lucky guy, because I did tamper with the alarm bell of 33 seconds. As he finished speaking, the bell rang, letting his words enter Orochimaru's ears, who, mulling back his thoughts, let the three go. The boy wasn't lying. His snakes did pick that up. Still, he didn't think he'd screw up on a matter of seconds. "So you said it backwards? That was a nice trick. You used my arrogance against me, did you not?" Still, recalling the time he had spent looking for them, there was something off. Maybe he had mistakenly taken 1 more minute, since he didn't actually have a watch, instead using the sun, and calculating minutes with the sun was sometimes impractical. The three stared at each other nervously, for a moment, before turning their gaze to Naruto, who, scratching the back of his head, muttered after about half a minute. Well, yeah, the only problem, Orochimaru-sensei, is that I set the watch forward of 33 seconds, instead of backwards. As he sheepishly admitted that, Orochimaru's eyes bulged. Wait, did that mean kukukuka? As the snake sanin chuckled, he realized how far the boy had thought. If captured, the bell ringing would mean they would yield easily, be dropped, and then when the actual time was passed they'd claim freedom as the mean to pass the test. It was a double-edged sword, a gamble, because if Orochimaru hadn't dropped them, they'd still have lost, and that was the reason the tampering had been set of 33 seconds. To allow them freedom, without telling him if it was backwards or forwards. We start training tomorrow, Orochimaru said, with a grin. Let me look at your leg, Naruto-kun, I'll fix it. And as the blonde boy moved closer, between the happy face of Anko, who had just scored being taught by the snake sanin himself, and Itachi, who was making a slight smile, Orochimaru gently pressed his right finger on the cast of the boy, cutting it open, and then, with a quick movement of the hand, set the bone and injected a cellular growth remedy, something he had created to try and mimic his teammates' in-release ability and creation rebirth. Adding a couple of painkillers to the mixture, and it would have his leg set in the next 2 hours, without even letting him feel pain. No training with it till tomorrow, though, their sensei said, as he got back up from the kneeling position he had been in, to heal Naruto's leg. And be here, punctually, at 5 in the morning sharp. No tampering with the clock, ever again, he added, the last words said with his golden eyes narrowed, and letting a threatening tone linger within them. Yes, sensei. The 3 genins replied, nodding furiously, as they waited for their new sensei to leave, before dropping on the ground, panting and breathing raggedly from the fear and the stress of having passed the genin test. Damn, that was wicked! Anko yelled, underneath stuff all the way. Brat, I like you. As she lunged forward, hugging tightly Naruto, the blonde boy slightly blushed at such a display of affection from the older girl, while Itachi's grin was becoming more like a permanent feature of his face. Let's go eat some dangos to celebrate then. The purple-haired Kunoichi exclaimed, standing back up, her cheery attitude strangely contagious, as Naruto and Itachi followed her. The Uchiha was sure his father would have a heart attack, knowing that his son was getting training from none other than the snake sanin himself, while his mother would probably smile at the thought of him being in the same team as Naruto. Itachi was glad the boy had been in his team. Without his philosophy of underneath, they would have probably failed badly from the very start. Instead, Naruto held true to what every shinobi should think, in every single moment, better safe than sorry, and break all patterns to get the upper hand. Anko, on the other hand, was chuckling. She just had 2 young boys she could probably mold to view her as a sort of princess, once her charm worked full way, and through the use of dango, which meant food, she'd grab them by the stomach, of that she was sure. Oh, by the way, Anko said as they neared the dango stall, everyone pays his own, I'm not offering. As she said that, Naruto winced slightly, before mentally shrugging. As Itachi sighed, he was starting to get it as a bad habit, sighing. Shouldn't elders set the example? The Uchiha queried, as a nervous tick mark appeared on Anko's forehead. Are you calling me old brat? Anko replied, her tone threatening. No, but stingy should be used to describe you, Itachi replied, as the girl's eyes narrowed. Listen up, clanboy, I'm sure you get a weekly allowance that's higher than my monthly check for being an orphan, and since this month I'm going to be a genin, until missions roll and I'll be short on cash, so you can suck it up and pay your own dangos, or you can watch me eat mine, most graciously, I must add. As she said the last sentence, Itachi's eyes softened. Oh sorry, I didn't. You didn't know? Well yeah, it's not like I go around parading it, Anko replied, getting her own dango stick, as, on the other hand, Itachi took one too, and realizing only then that Naruto had been waiting for them a bit far from the stall. The other brat is not getting any? Does he feed on souls? Or she didn't finish the sentence, because Itachi's gaze on her was nearly murderous, making her stop and slightly pale. Do not insult him without knowing, and don't you dare joke on him, Itachi whispered. If you think you have it tough, he has it tougher. As he muttered that, he moved closer to Naruto, resuming his normal smirk. You don't like dangos, right? Itachi asked his fellow teammate, who nodded with an awry smile. While Itachi knew that wasn't the truth, since the boy ate anything, as long as it was edible, he knew that the sole other reason would be monetary, and Naruto was simply too prideful to accept a dango stick from him. He never wanted charity. Well, tomorrow, after training, we'll go have ramen at Ichiraka's then. It's just fair we all take turns with food. At those words, Anko mentally recalled how Ichiraka did have cheap ramen, even cheaper than her dangos, so she actually could go too. Was the boy surviving on ramen, whereas she survived on dangos? Sure, he was a jinchuriki, but he once was a member of the Namake's clan. Damn, he once was the son of the 4th Hokage. He'd just been disowned for what, 2 years? Didn't he have any money on him when they kicked him out? Or a bank account? Rich kids already had bank accounts, didn't they? Say kid, Anko started, turning her gaze to Naruto, who looked back and waited for the question, while Itachi was slightly tensing. If the girl tried anything, respect for age to be damned, he'd fling a kunai through her back. You should speak up if you don't like dangos, she cheerily said, making Itachi mentally sigh, as Naruto sheepishly scratched the back of his head. I didn't want to disrespect you, Mitarashi-san. As the blonde boy said that, With such a cute tone, Anko's eyes sparkled, making Itachi tense, just for another, completely different reason. Ah. You're so kawaii. As the girl said that, hugging the lights out of the blonde kid, literally rocking him left and right in her tight hug, Itachi's sweat dropped. Well, maybe it was fellowship between tough childhoods? Yo! The exclamation came from a silver-haired jounin, who suddenly appeared in the middle of the road, bright orange-covered book in hand, and staring with his only visible eye, the other covered by his forehead protector, at the genin group. I heard congratulations are in order, Naruto-kun. Hataki-san, Naruto replied, politely bowing his head, as the jounin's face lit up. Yeah, the boy knew perfectly well how to address his elders with respect. He was just the most polite student ever. The copycat ninja had found it of no trouble at all to teach him some basics, or give him pointers. Wait, isn't that the copycat ninja Kakashi Hatake? The son of the White Fang? As Anko said that, pointing towards the silver-haired jounin, the boy in question, of 16 years old, closed his book, to give an eye smile to the purple-haired Kunoichi. Hatake-san and Naruto-kun know each other since a while ago, Itachi explained briefly, as Naruto walked forward, a lot less limping than mere minutes ago, with a sort of small smile on his face. Well, a promise is a promise, Kakashi said, as he handed the boy a small tanto. Now that you're a genin, I expect you to keep to heart your promises, got it? Yes, Kakashi-san. At the change of way to call him, the silver-haired jounin nodded, mentally holding within his head a victory sign. In the Hokage's tower, meanwhile, Minato Namikaze banged his fist against his desk. I told you to make him fail, he exclaimed, glad for the soundproof walls more than ever, in that moment, and the privacy seals. It appears, Hokage-sama, Orochimaru hissed the last part with ill-hidden disdain, that he has undeniable qualities for being a shinobi, and for that alone he would be more than worthy of being taken as an apprentice by myself, exclusively. But since you barred that out, I took his team, and they all passed. As he finished speaking, Minato's blue eyes shot an accusing glance at the snake's sanin. They passed, or you made them pass? He queried, a legendary sanin played for a fool by 3 genins? Do you think I'm stupid? I would never claim such a thing, Hokage-sama. Orochimaru held barely the need to add a sarcastic tone in his voice, but whether that is the truth or not, it does not matter. I passed them, they are a team, and I will take them on missions, and train them to become the very best. The tone wasn't an overly enthusiastic one, or a promise one. It loomed in the air like a sort of threat, each word carefully placed in a way to signal that indeed, he'd train them, but maybe he'd do that for purposes other than what one could think about and mostly life-threatening. Well then, tomorrow afternoon, they will have the honor, together with you, to go on their first mission, a D-rank one. As Minato finished speaking, the window's glass panels neatly creaked, lightly, like if some sort of pressure had suddenly been applied against them. Hokage-sama, Orochimaru hissed, his eyes narrowing, I say they can start with sea missions as soon as I finish training them. As he said that, Minato's blue eyes lit up, together with his face assuming a cheesy grin. Good thing then that I am the Hokage, since you will be doing D-rank missions until there are no more available. As his tone was sort of happy, as he said that, Orochimaru simply turned to leave. I will not tell a Hokage that he is making a mistake. I did it once, and it didn't work, and without turning around, he was already out of the office. Him as Hokage. The screech had been the first possible display of emotions that weren't glee, laughter, sadness, or things like that. It was pure rage, something that the pale man had never shown before. Orochimaru-kun, he'll do what the village needs before what he, himself, need. That's what being a Hokage means. To put the village first, before anyone else. Could you really do that, my student? Obviously, Orochimaru hadn't replied immediately, but then his eyes had narrowed, and he has hissed, back at his teacher, the third Hokage. You are making a mistake, Hokage-sama. And with those cold, harsh words, Orochimaru had left the office, not caring that Jiraiya, that old fool, had tried to stop him from doing so. He didn't need to hear his senseis talk about how they should help and counsel the soon-to-be new Hokage. Minato turned his gaze once more to the village that thrived and spread its strength and influence under his guide. To be the Hokage, one must put the village before his own needs, his own interests. I fail at that, it seems, and with an awry smile, he turned once more to fight off against his most horrible enemy, paperwork. In the meantime, Kakashi had left the genin group to their own devices, and the 3 were now sitting on a bench in the park, which, even though it was crowded with people, had left them in a sort of hole, devoid of noise, and the few who had to pass near the bench, to get somewhere, did so quickly, and with an utterly nervous look on them. Hey brat, Anko said in a teasing tone, can I ask you a question? As she asked Itachi, the Uchiha raised an eyebrow before waiting what the question actually was. You're of the Uchiha clan, right? So, where's your Sharingan? Itachi sighed. It was a common misconception that being an Uchiha meant having the Sharingan. Some never awoke it, others did late, others did soon. It depended. It might come out soon, or later, or it might not come out at all. As he finished saying that, Anko nodded, before tapping slightly on her knees. Well, let's get to know each other better. My name is Mitarashi Anko. You can call me Anko-sama, or Anko-san. As she said that, she turned to Naruto, saying with a grin, you can call me Anko-chan. Then, resuming her speech, she added, I've got a hell of a good aim, and my reflexes are top-notch. I'm also very studious, by the way, and my favorite spot is in the library. I wouldn't have thought that, Anko-chan, Naruto muttered, looking at the purple-haired girl, who was staring perplexed at the boy. Was he really teasing her? Did she completely misread his character? You seem so much cheery, I thought you'd like hanging around the commercial district. Like all over girls, what's funny now? Why are you repressing a chuckle? As the boy queried that, perplexed, Anko couldn't help herself. The boy wasn't rude even when he expressed his opinion. Well, nothing at all. What about you, Naruto-kun? As she queried that, the blonde boy replied, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, you know that already. And I'm good at surviving, and I can hide very well. Saying those things, especially the first one, with a lot of pride, made Anko's sweat drop. Was surviving something to be proud of? Naruto-kun can enter high-security areas with little problem, Itachi added, seeing as his friend was selling himself short. He can also come up, like you have seen, with more than one way of dealing with the problem. His henge is top stuff, sometimes even the Uchiha guards are caught by it. As he finished speaking, Anko whistled. Well, if you did get promoted ahead of time, it just meant you had to be good, didn't you? What about you, clan's boy? Can I please be called Itachi-kun? Itachi queried, as Anko's face lit up with a teasing tone. Oh, jealous I call Naruto-kun with the kun? As the girl ruffled the blonde boy's hair, the blue-eyed boy whined, while Itachi simply sighed. He was going to get old really fast, he had a feeling about it. No, but I do believe it would help if we consider each other equals, instead of bringing up hierarchies or age gaps. As Itachi pointed that out, Anko frowned for a moment, but then shook her head in dismissal. Fine, Itachi-kun, your proud and beautifully mature kunoichi teammate will take care of everything. Now spill the beans. What can you do? I know how to do the Katon jutsus typical of the Uchiha clan, and I was first in genjutsu practice and use, Itachi pointed out, only for Naruto, this time, to butt in. Itachi-kun knows how to do those cool things with chakra that make it seem sort of like a dream, like him turning into crows or things like that. He's sometimes better than me at taijutsu, but that depends if he gets first strike in or not. I see you two look out for each other a lot, huh? Anko said, actually feeling a bit jealous. Sure, she had friends, but these two looked like having come out from a bucolic story about male friendships that usually turned a bit dirtier because of said kunoichi's devious mind. I think it would be irresponsible to leave Naruto-kun alone for the safety of the village, Itachi said, with a smirk, as Anko raised an eyebrow. Was he afraid of the Kyuubi? But then, Naruto didn't seem much puzzled by that. So what was the deal? So you're afraid of? As she began talking, Itachi realized the misunderstanding, and chuckled. No, not that. He is truly a force to be reckoned with, but not because of what he harbors. Left alone, he tends to get himself into really dangerous situations for him and for those next to him. Like that time he strolled into the Umbu department. At those words, Naruto winced, recalling the scene. It wasn't my fault. What did I know that tree stumps aren't supposed to be hollow? I was just curious. I did get myself some nice stuff though, but it's too big for me to use anyway. As soon as the blonde boy said that, Anko raised an eyebrow. Nice stuff? Naruto nodded at the question. You want to see it? My apartment is nearby, he replied. Oh, already making a move on your teammate? That won't work, Gaki. But you got me curious. Who knows what it could be? As they hopped off the bench, Anko's mind was filled with thoughts about giant magic katanas or enormous juggernaut-like armors, or dango maces, or things like that. As they slowly made their way towards his apartment, the blonde boy grew incredibly quiet, until he simply stopped just on the hallway that would lead to his door, which was slightly open. Could you wait here for a moment, please? Naruto whispered to the two, as he moved closer, towards the open door and entering it after a brief moment of uncertainty, actually showing off a bit of fear, while doing that. What, hiding the porn stash? I don't care! Anko exclaimed, just as Itachi's gaze narrowed slightly, before turning to face the kunoichi. You remember my previous words? The Uchiha whispered as the purple-haired girl looked back at him, perplexed. Well, let's go. And with that, Itachi entered the apartment, followed by Anko, who, however, stopped on the doorstep. To say the room was trashed was to say her room was tidy. Her room was a mess, but that was because she didn't keep much of an order. His room? His room had been stomped, his pillows torn apart. There was a dead dog's carcass in a corner couple of weeks old, that sent an horrible stench throughout the room, paint marks covered in red obscenities the boy's walls. The few clothes he had been tattered and trashed, and what little remained of salvageable wasn't even good for a single night. In the middle of the mess, Naruto was simply, and calmly, moving the broken pieces of his bed out of the way, sighing in relief as he removed a wooden loose plank, taking out an actual adult trench coat, and what seemed like a kunai pouch, followed by a frog-like wallet, and then, after putting the pouch and the wallet in his inner pockets, he turned to stare for a brief second, with a shocked face, at the two who had entered his apartment. Well, seems there's been a theft in here, he said carefully, trying a smile that simply looked too fake to be real. Did they steal anything? Itachi queried slowly, but as Naruto shook his head, the Uchiha's eyes turned a bit sad. Naruto, it's not a theft if they don't steal stuff. This is plain vandalism. Come on, you could sleep. Itachi, no, Naruto replied, shaking his head. I'll just need to survive another month, maybe 2 or 3. With the mission money coming in, I might be able to rent an apartment on my own, And that should be enough, he added. Ngaki, Anko said in a barely audible whisper, you know you can have another apartment assigned to you by the Hokage, right? I could, but I won't trouble him. The tone in which he said that, however, was meaning something else. It was him, the blonde boy, that didn't want to deal with the Hokage, and not out of sympathy. And I'm going to be fine, really, he added, as Itachi's eyes narrowed. Fine, but you will file a formal accusation against Unknown. At least it should force the Hokage to cash out money for the repairs. At that, Naruto shook his head. You know how it would end, Itachi. Come on, I already did it once. They'll find out that I didn't close the door, or that the window wasn't safely locked, and the fault will be on me, and I'll have to pay for the damages myself. His smile was making Anko's heart hurt. It was simply so much resigned. Hi now! The purple-haired Kunoichi snapped. I ain't having a whiny boy as a teammate. You need to get some balls and go talk with that man. Come on, he was your father for Kami's sakes, he should at least. Anko! That's enough! Itachi yelled. For once, he actually yelled that. A 7-year-old yelling to an 11 years, going for 12, actually, years old, and as he did that, Naruto's face simply darkened, looking on the ground. While Anko stood silent, she knew the boy had been disowned. It had made a bit of a ruckus, especially since the reason given had been disrespect of the clan head. Yet Naruto did seem such a polite boy, so surely it had to be political. Maybe she didn't believe a father would actually hate his own son, right? Ouch, got some dust in the eyes, Naruto muttered, letting his sleeve wipe his eyes for a moment. Well, anyway, this is what I took from the Umbus. Handing the trench coat to Anko, the Kunoichi realized his eyes had a little water in them, probably the dust. Yeah, Earth calls Anko. He's still 7 years old. You can't expect him not to cry. Come on, you cried your own fair deal too. Now stop being a prick and hug the poor boy. That was probably the genetic instincts tied into any female since birth that made them immediately fawn over a crying boy, at least, the majority of them. Still, she decided to break the tension in the air by unraveling the trench coat and admiring it for a moment. Putting it on, she realized she at least needed a good growth spurt more before being able to wear it without stumbling. Well, it's nice and all, a bit big, but it should be a nice fit for you in 5 or 6 years. As she said that, Naruto meekly smiled. You can have it, he whispered. I don't know if I'll be around in 5 or 6 years. After all, as he finished saying that, Anko's face was puzzled. Now come on, no need to be so macabre. The purple-haired girl said, sure, being a shinobi is a sure way to die young, but with me around, don't you worry, I'll keep an eye out for your back. As the girl tapped on the boy's shoulder, and did the same on Itachi, she added, I'll be here also for Clan Boy. I'm sure he needs some time off from babysitting. As pouts and sighs echoed in the room, a new team with tight bonds saw the light of their first day together. Their second day, on the other hand, saw Anko at 5 in the morning being hauled off the bed by a giant snake, while an apologetic, and still half sleepy, Itachi, stood tightly into the spires of another one. Naruto was the only one spared said treatment, as he also was the only one dressed. Training begins now, as a perfectly dressed in Jounin sensei attire. Orochimaru said that. Anko muttered. But sensei, you said 5 in the morning. It's barely 3. I lied. You should have expected me to do that, the snake's sanin replied, before hopping off, from roof to roof, followed closely by Naruto, who had a small backpack held tightly to himself, and then, the three reached the training grounds, and there, the snakes dispersed in smoke, and as two still in pajamas Genin started to slight shiver. Naruto's gaze was a bit sad, as he rummaged through his pack. Now, first rule I want you to follow. Always be ready for anything, the golden-eyed ninja said. I don't care if you're in the bathroom, if you're having a fever or if you're sleeping. When I come around to get you for training, I expect you to be ready to train, forget your equipment, and you will do the exercises, even if you have to build your own shurikens to do so, understood? Hi sensei. Anko muttered, her hands strongly rubbing her arms' sides, trying to warm herself up from the cold breeze of the night. How? Itachi's question was more referred to how Orochimaru had managed to slip inside the Uchiha compound, with a giant snake, and move out of there without being noticed, especially by the guards. Well, that's a shinobi's secret. As the snake Sanin spoke, his mouth forming a small grin, he looked with a moment of surprise at Naruto, who had taken out a chocolate bar, and had neatly cut it in half, giving one part, with a deliberately careful and polite gesture, to Anko, and the other to Itachi, who took his half and splitting it in half, handed the quarter back to Naruto, who nodded, before turning to Orochimaru to hand it over. Chocolate? Orochimaru raised an eyebrow, puzzled. It was the first time one of his genins actually had the guts, the gall, or maybe simply the audacity to offer him chocolate. Usually some annoying kunoichi would go all out and bring him flowers, or boxes of chocolates, things he wouldn't accept at all. But this gesture from the boy, it simply seemed deliberately made with a precise objective, and he was just curious about what it could be. It's cold outside, Naruto replied. Chocolate makes one warmer, he pointed out. For a brief moment, nobody spoke a single word, not even daring to take a bite of the chocolate, as Anko, sheepishly, broke her own piece in two. She couldn't eat half and leave the boy without a piece. After all, Orochimaru, after what seemed like an eternity, slowly used two of his fingers to grab his quarter, and just as Anko gave half of her half to the boy, everyone slowly ate the quarter worth of chocolate, in an utterly silent moment of sheer impossibility that, however, happened. If Jiraiya saw me, I'm pretty sure he'd use this as a way for his research. Well, the boy was said to be unpredictable, but I never expected this much. It will prove to be interesting to teach this group, it seems. As the thought lingered for a moment, the snake sanin pointed at Itachi. I'm sure you know the katan jutsus of your clan. As the boy nodded, Orochimaru spoke to the entire team, adding, and while I'm pretty sure you lot do not possess the necessary capacities to use other elemental jutsus effectively right now, especially since you still need to develop the chakra control and chakra reserves, I'll teach you methods to refine your chakra needs for the techniques. By the time you'll finish this, you should be able to effectively half the chakra cost for jutsu's first step, however, is to climb that tree. As he said that, he pointed to the tree in question, a normal-looking tree in the middle of the training ground. That's easy, Anko said, as she dashed towards it, quickly using her hands and her feet to climb it. She wasn't an expert, but she had the strength of desperation, and she did want to warm up and go home as quickly as possible. Futon de tapa. A small amount of wind blew her on the ground, making her wince in pain as she ended up in a bush that luckily held no thorns, or painful stuff like scattered kunais forgotten after practice hours. The latter wasn't there not because of luck, but because Naruto did take some time every night to clean through the training grounds and scavenge anything he could use for his own benefit. Ouch. What was that for, sensei? Anko whined, getting slowly back on her feet. You must climb it by using chakra, like this. A bit frowning, Orochimaru simply defied gravity, letting his feet stand on the bark of the tree as he climbed it, but only of about 2 steps, not wanting to waste time, and then simply jumping down from it, with practiced ease. Wow! What do we have to do for that, sensei? As the kunoichi asked it, once more, the golden eyes of Orochimaru turned to the other 2 boys, and seemingly sporting a grin, the snake sanin replied. Kokuku asked Itachi-kun he should be familiar with this exercise. I'll come back when you all have passed the exercise, don't worry about that. And as Orochimaru turned to leave, he was a really busy man, even at 3 in the morning. Anko's gaze turned to Itachi. Well, Itachi said, you concentrate chakra to the sole of your feet, and once you're done, you should be able to stick them to the surface of the wall, or in this case, tree bark. With ease. You need just the right amount, though too much and the bark breaks, too little and it doesn't stick. As the Uchiha finished pointing that out, he demonstrated it by walking all the way to the top of the tree. This works also on walls, to reach windows, apartments, and with correct usage, you can even walk on water, paper doors and the likes, Naruto added, to the purple-haired girl's surprise. So you got this down too? As she queried that, Naruto nodded. Itachi showed it to me, and I learned it is survival material. As the blonde boy said that with a small smile, he added, Itachi-kun, you can go home and get your clothes, possibly a spare change for Anko-chan too? In the meantime we'll start. While I trust Anko-chan will get this down soon, she might still take some time, you should use it. And with that, Itachi nodded, dashing off. Orochimaru, hidden nearby, couldn't repress a grin. Already a team, and already there was a leader, a worker, and obviously a weak link. He'd have fun messing around with them. Oh, he would. Some months later, Teru, Terra, Tuna, Tiara, and finally Tora, those were the names of the cats the daimyo's wife possessed, all of them found dead, only their furs, with little to no blood, delivered to the palace's door with a sign saying that animals shouldn't be lost, especially with recent cuts in funds issued to the war orphans, or things like that. Obviously, there was no proof that Orochimaru, or his genin team, had done it, but it was starting to be the common murmur that somebody captured, skinned the pets of the daimyo, and then ate them with stew. That was stupid. Naruto could swear that cat stew tasted horrible. Now, cat barbecue on the other hand was a different thing. Still, without a cat to hunt, the missions around town finally came to an end. As always, the team had Orochimaru standing behind them, Anko in first line, Itachi to her right, Naruto behind the 2 and leaning towards, hiding as much of his body as possible from the Hokage's view, who, saying nothing, simply looked over the mission roster. It appears there are no D-rank mission any longer, he muttered, which seems strange, he added, turning his gaze to Irika, who, however, had nothing to say. It could happen, and they had been lucky coming in for another one during said period. So we'll get a C-rank finally? I mean, Hokage-sama, we've been on over 57 D-rank missions till now. We have cleaned the Aburame's hives, the Inazuka kennels, the Akimichi latrines, and that wasn't a good thing, as Anko's face showed disgust just by saying that. The Yamanaka flower shop has been rearranged. The Uchiha compound is sparkling clean. That day Mikoto had actually started chuckling, and hadn't stopped till they had finished their work. Something about seeing her son and his friend using dustpans simply had made her start giggling like a madwoman. The Nara clan has all their deers accounted for and vaccinated, a troublesome thing, certainly. And the Hyuga had the new dojo mats placed. We did all the works that any Suki genin team should do. We want a higher level mission. As Anko exclaimed that in the end, Irika's forehead showed a nervous tick mark. Is that the way to show respect to the Hokage, brat? Kakuku, is that the way to talk to one of my personally trained genins? Orochimaru replied, his eyes narrowing on the Chunin sensei that paled slightly, before turning to the Hokage whose clear blue eyes had settled on the group, before muttering. Fine. At that, the group sighed in relief, except Naruto, who kept being tense. There is a C-rank mission available. You are to head to Tanzaka town, and once there, retrieve a package from the famous dollmaker Kokuyo, and bring it back here. It will be your first time out of the village. You are to expect nothing more than a long-term trip, but once you do retrieve the package, know that the doll inside is precious and highly sought. Expect thieves to try and claim it. As the Hokage finished speaking, Orochimaru's smile was something warranting a bit of a worry, but the snake sanin simply nodded, accepting the scroll with more details on the mission, turning to leave together with his genin team, not before having done one of his famous and trademarked chuckles. The group slowly reached for the gate, without moving to pack up stuff, since there was no need to. By now they knew how their sensei worked, a combination of doing things immediately, without beating around. You either had to be prepared to take any mission, at any moment, or you were to be prepared to be sorely beaten, defeated, or in some other way humiliated by still going on the mission, but without the equipment. Meaning that once, Anko had found herself forced to do a D-rank mission of weeding the grass with her pajamas still on, and no amount of plead or prayers had moved their sensei. You either were ready when he came to get you, or you weren't, and you paid the price. There was neither sympathy nor hate. It was just a job description, and Orochimaru followed it by the rule. He seemed to care about the well-being of his team, but only when he found it would be worth his time. Thus Itachi had simply been given pointers, Naruto had barely received much attention, and Anko had been toughened up to be on par with the other two. The Uchiha didn't need to be fawned on to grow, and neither did Naruto. The girl, on the other hand, cherished on such display of interest, and while having developed a bit of an arrogant side, she kept it mostly in check. As the group departed from the gates, Anko, sporting a smug grin, stretched for a brief second, letting her fishnet shirt loose for a moment, as she wore a dark green jacket on top of it, closed till her cleavage area, which was still sorely lacking. She had a pale purple skirt, that, while not being extremely short, wasn't all that long ever, to guarantee mobility. Itachi had a plain brown shirt, with the Uchiha symbol on the back, dark beige shorts and a small belt with kunai pouches. Naruto had a seemingly normal gray long-sleeved jacket, underneath which a stint black shirt was visible, his trousers, long and cream color, finished in a sort of leaf motif. Needless to say, shopping at night hours, when the shop is closed, doesn't warrant for much time to pick a choice of clothes. Orochimaru obviously knew of the boy's nightly activities, but he said nothing. He had done so in the past, and he still did that, albeit recently his targets had been more lively. He was just sure that one night, he'd be going one way on the rooftops with a big clothes sack, with some new test subject inside, and he'd cross Naruto going the other way with stolen clothes, and they'd simply salute each other without problems, both going their way with a grin on their face. Tanzaka Town is known for being a gambling den, and is filled with casinos, Anko said. True to her words, she was a bookworm, and since she couldn't go check their destinations beforehand, she had come to terms to memorize at least a geography book, to always know something of where they were meant to be going. Is this Kokuyo guy famous? Naruto queried, seeing as he never, ever, saw a doll, nor played with one. He is, actually, Itachi said. I overheard my mother saying how glad she was I wasn't born female so she wouldn't have to gift me one of his dolls. Some get to cost as high as 200,000 ryo. As Naruto's eyes blinked for a moment, the blonde boy turned to Orochimaru. Sensei? The snake Sanin's eyes turned with interest to the boy. Yes, Naruto-kun? How much are 200,000 ryo? At the question, Orochimaru sighed. Naruto, ramen, the priciest one with everything inside, costs no more than a 200 ryo, so imagine 2,000 of those ramen. As Naruto slightly moved his head to the side, mulling the thought over, he suddenly realized something. So, basically, instead of a doll of his, we could feed the entire village on ramen for lunch? At that, Orochimaru nodded. So instead, someone bought this doll, right? Once more, Orochimaru nodded. What idiot would do something that stupid? At that, Anko sighed. Well, it was stupid to her too, but it was life. Some people had it rough, and others had it easier. There are a lot of people, Naruto-kun, who would do that. Daimyos, for example, have a lot of money, and they can use it as they wish, but anyone with a lot of cash could buy it. Think about it. Sensei has done a lot of S-rank missions, he is very rich, he could probably buy 2,000 of those dolls if he wished for it, just like, with the money for a single doll, you could buy 2,000 ramen from Ichiraku, thus it depends on the person's own possibilities, Itachi explained, slowly. Duh, but if you want one of those dolls so badly you can always steal it. At that reply from Naruto, Orochimaru chuckled. Naruto! Stealing is bad. Sensei, Naruto isn't stealing anything at all, I know it. Anko said immediately, just as Orochimaru's chuckle turned into a small smile. A shinobi is first and foremost a thief, Anko-chan, the snake Sanin said. We steal information, we steal treasures or weapons needed for our own cause, we steal lives from our enemies. A shinobi is also a murderer, a tool, a weapon, an object. It is also a person, and a human being. There are many faces to the coin called shinobi, so stealing, while certainly illegal, is only bad if you get caught. As the pale-skinned man finished talking, his golden eyes set themselves on Itachi, who said nothing, thus making him add, albeit I shouldn't probably say this with the son of the private Konoha Police Department's chief in my team. Stealing to survive isn't stealing, Itachi spoke, after a brief quiet moment, it's simply balancing the scale, stealing for fun, money, or for the sheer thrill of it. That's what is wrong. Well, if that's your opinion, just don't let Fugaku-san catch you saying that. With Orochimaru's warning, silence fell once more for the trip, until at the first night of rest, while Naruto was doing the first turn of guard duty, Anko suddenly sat down next to him. So you like the Ichiraku's girl? She asked, in an innocent tone, making the boy's face turn slightly sad. No, I can't, he replied, in a murmur, his head shaking. And why can't you? Anko queried, perplexed. After the Kyuubi stuff, and the seal the Hokage declared me a hero, you know? He said it out loud. My son is a hero. He harbors the Kyuubi in him, and thus is a hero to be respected. Then, the next day, I was forced to pack few things, and thrown into an orphan apartment, claiming I was a danger for myself, and those around me. His tone grew bitter, and I was disowned for disrespecting the clan leader, and with that, the hero that jailed the Kyuubi became simply the Kyuubi in a human skin. Everyone feared me. They thought I had even attacked the Hokage himself, since he did sport some bandages later on, probably cut himself to act the wounded part, Naruto muttered, his eyes wincing, and finally, after a while, he came back, offering me to come back only if I stopped being a shinobi. Naruto had a smirk on his face. I wanted to know why he did that. Why couldn't he do that in the beginning? What was his game? His reasons? I wanted to know, and he didn't tell me. He said only a Hokage could have understood. That's the day I decided I'd seek the truth out. As Naruto spoke quietly, he threw another wooden stick into the fire. Unknown to him, Orochimaru was obviously wide awake and keen on listening. How does that tie to the Ichiraku's girl? Anko queried. Well, before everything started, before being a jinchuriki, having the Kyuubi inside, I usually went with my mother there, you know? She was my same age, so we became friends. And I usually came around to play with her and Itachi. That's why Itachi doesn't have a stick up his ass like half the Uchiha of the compound. No offense for them. As he said that, he could have sworn Itachi had mumbled none taken, but he was sleeping, right? Get to the point, boy, the point. Anko whined. Why couldn't he just get to the damn point? It annoyed her to see a 7-year-old speak like one of her age group. I didn't go back to Ichiraku's for a while, and when I finally did, she was scared. In the beginning, the smile was awry, as he recollected that memory. Well, he officially had gone long enough without food. He was starving. He had some money in his pockets, and he knew they'd be enough for some salt ramen. It was his mother's, or well, his ex-mother's favorite, and he could get only one, but he was hungry. He didn't know what to do with the paper slip. The guy who had delivered had just thrown it at his face, after spitting on it, so he had no idea what to do with it. Was it a spit cleaner? Did spit cleaners actually exist? In the end, he was starving, and he was there. Usually he would have simply entered, saying the normal greeting. Right now, however, he was afraid he'd scare them, make them kick him out. He was still a bit suffering from his shoulder wound, but not that much any longer, so he slowly moved in, his eyes nervously glancing at the face of Tucci, who had stopped in his doings to look at him with a perplexed face. Naruto could see the shock, he could see it. He couldn't hold that feeling of pain in his soul any longer. His heart ached, but it was fine, yet he did manage to meekly say, "Hi." It was all he could say. His throat was a bit parched, even though water had been his sole companion for a while, being tap water something his apartment had. His one room had a small sink, and that was all that he had eaten or drank, even if to just pass time. "Hello, Naruto-kun, what would you like to order?" Tucci had asked the boy, trying a smile, as the boy seemed, to him, like a rabbit ready to sprint out, away from there, at the minimum noise. "One salt ramen, please, Ichiraku-san," Naruto muttered meekly, taking a seat and staring hard at the counter, his gaze not even daring to look upwards. From fear, he was actually shivering, slightly, and the back of his jacket seemed torn in a point, and a dirt red color. Tucci had frowned. The boy was doing his best to be as formal as possible. The rumors of him being disrespectful were clearly false. But more than that, the problem was that he couldn't believe someone could disown a child over saying no to a parent. Would he disown I am for saying no to him? No, he wouldn't. A kid shouldn't be disowned, but taught. Coming right up, "I am Chan, help me out." The girl was behind the counter, and nodding to her father, moved to help, but her gaze, every time it stopped to look at Naruto, it seemed a bit frightened, something that the boy picked up, when, every now and then, he let his gaze wander from the hard counter's surface to the broth cooking, the salt being added, and finally the bowl being served to him, as he meekly nodded and began eating, in silence. It was filled with nervousness, the air around them. The boy wasn't being his usual smiling self, but nobody could fault him, and as he slowly ate his ramen, Tucci could actually see the boy was famished. He knew malnourishment when he saw it, and so, as he prepared another bowl, he could hear the meek voice of the boy ask, "Here, I've got to." "Wait a moment, Naruto-kun." As Tucci said that, trying his best comforting tone, Naruto stopped dead on his tracks like a deer when a loud noise startled one. It would be a quick split-second decision. Either he'd calm the boy down in a second, or he'd see him running away like a thunderbolt. "Another's coming up on the house. It's a special day today, after all." As he said that, Naruto slowly sat down, looking perplexed at the man, and at I am. Normally, he would have already asked, but it would be rude, wouldn't it? So, when the bowl came, one of the really costly one, and thus the biggest, Naruto's face was a mixture of joy and happiness, and as he turned to stare at Tucci, with a puzzled expression, the man replied, Well, today's the day my favorite customer came back to my stall. Remember, kid, I have only one law: I never kick out any customer, no matter who he is. And with that, Naruto nodded, eagerly, for once, exclaiming itadakimasu, as he began eating with gusto. Naruto-kun, I muttered, after a moment, staring at the boy who stopped eating, a sort of panicked expression on his face, as he had dropped being polite. Would that mark him out as one of the favorite customers? He hoped not. Did you become the QB? As she asked that, Tucci nearly paled. If there was one thing that he didn't expect, was his daughter to actually ask a question he himself didn't want her to ask. He would have explained how it was impossible for something like that to happen. The boy was clearly Naruto, no matter how you looked at him. There was no way he could be anything else. Especially that enormous nine-tailed fox. I don't know, Naruto replied. I don't feel any different. I just have this tattoo on my right shoulder. But that's all there is. Oh, thank Kami, I said while sighing out a large amount of air, in relief. I was scared I'd have to beat the crap out of you to get Naruto-kun back. What? That question was asked by both a startled Tsuchi and Naruto, at the same time, while they looked at the adorable 5-year-old girl, who, staring back carefully, had left her frying pan gently drop on the counter. What is it, Ota-san? Hana-chan said that I should always beat the crap out of people I don't like. I don't like the QB, but I like Naruto-kun. That made Tsuchi cough slightly, as Naruto seemingly didn't understand at all. I see you're very honest about that. And with that, Tsuchi sighed, having avoided a crisis, but having potentially generated a worse one in the years to come. You know, she basically told you she liked you, right? 2 years ago I'd say you could return the feeling already, Anko pointed out, and, at that moment, Naruto's gaze turned upwards, to the night sky. Hana-chan was actually Hana Inuzuka, who, after a while, became my classmate at the academy, and one day, she confronted me on the very same reason you're bringing up now, only, that time, she asked me to stay away from and to never let my demon paws on her, or I'd taste her fists. At that, Anko raised an eyebrow. You know, this is getting really long-winded. Why don't you just cut the chase and tell me why you are not returning those feelings? Fine. Naruto rolled his eyes. Here he was, trying to let one of his teammates get to know him well enough to actually be trusted by her, and she was cutting it all down to simply get to the point. I verbally assaulted Hana back, she cried, hard, especially when I bluffed, claiming how she was a failure at keeping care of her ninkins, and things like that. When I found out, she asked me to apologize to her, and she arranged a meeting between us. During the so-called meeting, I did apologize, and we hung out for 5 minutes before a couple of Inuzuka dragged Hana away, kicked for being a friend of the demon, and flung me against a tree. As he said that, Anko winced, and Inuzuka could pack a punch. They were pretty good taijutsu users, and he would have been, 6 years old? So you actually distanced yourself from her to avoid her harm? As Anko queried that, Naruto nodded. You know what, the kunoichi said, turning her gaze to the blonde-haired boy. If I had been you, I'd have tapped into the QB's power already, and would have sent all my enemies on the ground, crying tears of blood and having them worship me and the ground I walked upon, she added. Kukuku, interesting words. Orochimaru slowly decided he had enough hearing talks at night. He wouldn't sleep nevertheless, but he did enjoy the silence over the speaking of children. But then, tell me, do you think demons are actually there to do your bidding, once in a seal? Having a demon inside, and being able to use his powers, to control their powers, do you think it's easy? Do you know another reason Naruto-kun is truly hated? There's more than one, sensei? Naruto asked, perplexed. Yeah, what's worse than being the jinchuriki of the QB? Anko asked. Well, the iron seal, the one used on his shoulder, is weak. It does the job barely, on the 8-tailed beast of Kumogakure, and they had to swap their jinchuriki nearly every 20 years now. Think about a 9-tailed beast trapped in a weak seal. Anyone who knows that, who knows how weak that seal actually is. Do you think they sleep in peace at night? Wait, so Naruto could potentially turn QB any split second? At that question, Anko's eyes widened in shock, but the most noticeable change was Naruto's face suddenly devoid of all colors. As his heart was beating like crazy, he could potentially die, be destroyed as the QB emerged free from him, in any moment? No, that couldn't be. There had to. Well, no, that got a sigh of relief off 3 genins, as even Itachi was wide awake, much to his dismay. But it means that when he'll tap onto its powers, there will be a higher risk of him going berserk, and that will mean I'll have to kill him, like I will kill you if you don't shut up and do your guard time, while we get sleep. Understood, Anko-chan? At that, Anko gulped. She was still relieved that she wouldn't risk waking up to a sight of giant fox demon teeth, and for that, she didn't mind furiously nodding to Orochimaru-sensei, and taking her turn. This was their first E-rank mission, but it was turning out to be a cakewalk, and she could feel that she was catching up to her teammates, and soon they'd be on par, and everything would turn out fine as they become the greatest team ever, maybe the second sanins themselves. As she slowly stood guard, she never realized Orochimaru had momentarily left his sleeping sack, leaving but a dried husk behind that would work in the same way to hide his disappearance from camp, to meet with his night visitor. A couple of meters away from camp, a boy, covered by a mask, stood silently. As the snake sanin neared him, a small smile appeared on the pale man's face, his golden eyes smirking at the sight of the perfectly polished white mask, with barely 2 fissures to let the boy's eyes actually see. So tell me, what does Danzo wish to say, little rootling? Tanzaka Town had been the bright idea of a wealthy merchant, not too far from a shinobi village, of which obviously no one knew the precise location, except other ninjas, yet not too far the capital of Hai no Kuni herself. This meant that Tanzaka Town actually had a lot of people passing through it in the beginning of its founding, but this wealthy merchant in particular had more plans, since, after all, people also need to spend stuff in town to make it grow. First the hotels were built, coupled with casinos, then followed souvenir shops of the casinos themselves, and from there onwards, the town flourished, and with great flows of money so too did criminal organizations rise, to conquer a spot in the town itself. Tanzaka Town had outskirts, which weren't all too dangerous, as those were the spots where the workers of the casinos lived, and there was a sort of unspoken law about not messing with the area, too poor to be considered worthy of anything, even of a drug ring. Then came the central area, that was where the majority of hotels and casinos were, and with the incredible amount of alleyways, back alleys, dirt roads, and dead ends, it was the perfect alcove for the worst existing scum ever to be born. Finally came the heart of Tanzaka Town, the area reserved for really important guests, or really rich people, villas, gardens, and police forces, obviously private ones, some even with the Konoha's forehead protector, but mostly belonging to a private guard of sorts of the Tanzaka Town's lord, Aiden Tanzaku. The town had quickly become the #1 spot for tourists, until the Kyubi, attacking Konoha, had sent a Baijidama, by mistake or intended, nearby, causing a veritable crater to sprout halfway through the city. This had forced the reconstruction of a good part of the town, and a severe death toll, that still then lingered in the mind of those who had survived the deafening explosion, that some simply called the Black Day, as said sphere, upon contact with the ground, had emitted a blackish chakra explosion, that had easily incinerated anything within its radius. Many things outside the immediate surroundings had been badly charred or destroyed instead, and further away, wounds and damage were still relatively high. Needless to say, traffic had dwindled for a while, but then it had flourished again. Casinos didn't need crops or farmable areas to be lucrative. Obviously, as one could have expected, the doll maker lived in the heart of the town, but if there was one thing that was on the side of the 3 genins, was that their sensei had decided to actually go with them. And when you have a legendary sanin walking behind you, there's no private army that can stop you from going where you have to go. And criminals, they didn't survive that long because they thought that they could take Orochimaru himself and live to tell the tale, that much was sure. Kokuyo's working area seemed more of a sort of private clinic, with a secretary, a lot of comfortable chairs and sofas, and little girls drinking tea with their pouting mothers, all dressed in clearly rich clothes. Naruto winced more than once. His thoughts, running along his face, were something easily picked up by Itachi, who knew the boy all too well. This is a doll maker shop? Are we in idiot land? Kami, save me please, is that a golden napkin in that brat's hands? Please somebody tell me this idiots don't actually buy more than one doll, followed by colored mental expressions, that made Orochimaru show a slight grin, seeing how the snake Sanin usually did the same line of thoughts, but on the more general population since, after all, he was a genius and the others weren't. Itachi looked puzzled, when the 2 guards inside the shop stopped them, letting only Orochimaru move forward. Kokuyo-sama was expecting a Konoha team, but he gave clear orders to only let their sensei through, one of the guards said, leaving the subtle message of dirty shinobi brats shouldn't be going around the shop. Which was probably what the doll maker had thought, and said, forcing the 3 genins to look at their sensei, who, with a smirk, nodded. Wait for me outside. As Orochimaru said that, the 3 genins nodded, turning to leave, while some murmurs of audacity and dirtiness echoed in the waiting room, by the old or fat but still extremely rich women and their nagging and spoiled children. Outside, Anko finally let go of her sort of emotionless mask, to pout. Did you see how they looked at us? I wanted to neuter them. I probably could neuter them, or kill them, you know. As she said that, turning to the other 2, Itachi frowned. There is no need to resort to violence, Anko-san. Sure, it wasn't nice, but there is nothing we can do, unless we wish to border illegality. As the Uchiha said that, the purple-haired Kunoichi sighed. I don't like it when they look at me, she then corrected herself, at us, like we're a bunch of no one. We could have probably beaten those 2 pricks of guards without a problem. Anko-san, the strong should protect the weak, not bully those he doesn't like, Itachi said, trying to reason with the elder girl, who, however, wasn't that easy to convince. I say they could have treated us better, or at least kept their thoughts to themselves, she replied. They did keep their thoughts to themselves, Naruto muttered, just as the elder girl flung a knuckle hit at the boy's head. It's a rhetoric way of speech. Actually, rhetoric questions are those that do not need answer in this case. Naruto-kun is right, Itachi pointed out, as the purple-haired Kunoichi winced. She'd have knuckle-punched Itachi too, but she was sure the boy would be able to deftly dodge her strike. Naruto, on the other hand, probably didn't dodge on purpose, or he simply wasn't fast enough. After the first weeks, being nearly exclusively trained by Orochimaru in his free time, she had managed to be on par, if not at the very least pass over Naruto, who was the weakest of the 3 genins now. Sure, she knew they were teammates, and that she shouldn't talk about who was strong and who was weak, but she did now defeat Naruto in spars mostly. The blonde boy always seemed afraid of hurting her, and for that, she simply was slightly angry at him. Sometimes she didn't manage to pull away her hits from connecting, a fact that resulted in the boy getting some bruises, but that overall didn't affect him much. She had said she was sorry, in the beginning, but then, after a while, she decided it had been subtly implied, and without even knowing it, she had simply started getting an arrogant attitude around the blonde boy, something Naruto didn't seem to have missed, but that he kept for himself. Anyway, there doesn't seem to have been a single problem all through the mission, so I'm starting to think we might cash in that money fast, shouldn't we? As soon as Anko said that, Itachi mulled a thought. How much does a C-rank mission pay? From 30,000 to 100,000, Naruto explained, but obviously you must consider the fact that you spend money while on a mission, if it's long-termed, on food or in rest, or maybe on souvenirs, thus you don't actually earn that much. Doing 2 D-rank missions, in the village, in one day, is far more convenient than a single long-winded C-rank mission. As the blonde boy said that, he sheepishly added, though I didn't think you were short on money, Itachi. I wanted to buy a souvenir to bring back to Kasan, and something for Sasuke, that is if we have time, the Uchiha explained, and knowing I won't end up with an empty wallet at the end of the day makes me at ease. As he added that, Anko chuckled. If you go with the Scrooge you start acting like one, huh? I did not say, but Itachi was interrupted, as the doors opened, and Orochimaru, with a clearly disgusted face, came out, his eyes promising murder most foul. It seems the man needs one more day to finish the blasted chunk of wood, the snake sanin hissed, making the reason he was angry much clearer. He hated being forced to wait. If there was one simple thing that made their sensei mad was messing up the timetable because of being late, so for today we will move to the outskirts of the town, and I will teach you a very important lesson. As he said that, he started moving, not even explaining what it was as the 3 genins followed him, worriedly. As they began moving, Naruto's eyes darted around. He was feeling a hunch. Itachi, Naruto whispered, getting the Uchiha's attention, whose eyes assumed a puzzled expression, waiting for the boy's words. I've got a feeling. That was enough for the Uchiha to tense, and since the words muttered by the blonde boy were picked up by Anko's ears, the purple-haired girl looked at the 2 7-years-old with a mixture of interest and perplexity. Everyone had bad feelings every now and then, but she was sure sensei was simply going to teach them something a bit tough. But nothing more, no need to get their hands to their kunais. As they reached a dirt alleyway in the outskirts, and from there, a patch of grass with some trees, Orochimaru turned around, with a smile, a wide smile, that wasn't, usually, something the snake sanin would ever do. Come on, boys. Let's teach the demons group. Itachi's kunai had already flung straight at the man's neck, gushing blood out of the wound, as the artery was cut, letting the crimson liquid fall downwards, messing his clothes and removing the henge that marked the man not as Orochimaru, but as a seemingly common ex-shinobi, probably an academy reject. From behind them, and from their sides, came the howling of 6 to 7 men. Naruto took the cue to fling out an explosive tag, and yell out loud, "Nobody moves or this goes off." At the yell, the charging criminals stopped. It was probably a bluff, but given their distance from the target, if they did move near it was probable he'd throw it at them without a second's thought. Anko, thanks to the breather, had gotten her hands on a kunai. She wouldn't admit it, but that was the kunai Naruto had given to her the first time they had fought together, and it was a really good kunai, so she kept it polished. They do seem to be a bit too much for us, you know? Anko muttered, and I'd like not to become ashes scattered in the wind, she slowly added, though she had to mull the thought of where the boy had managed to get an explosive tag. Those things were costly. Itachi, you there? Naruto asked, his eyes narrowing, as the dead body in front of them had already begun forming a pool of blood on the ground. Itachi was behind him, and he couldn't look to be sure. He had to keep being tense, so the enemies wouldn't gang up on them, a thing they should have done barring the risks, seeing the numerical advantage. All they need would be a sacrifice or two, the rest could pretty much grab them by sheer strength and be done with it. No, Itachi Uchiha wasn't there. Sure, he had tensed, sure he had thought there would be confrontations, sure he had thought everything was going to be fine after scaring the man off. He just wanted to use one of those moves where you fling the kunai and cut the cheek of the man, to scare him off. Try and let Naruto bluff their way out, since Naruto would have probably caught up and told something about them being personally trained by Orochimaru to be elite killers. Instead he had gone with his instincts, and he had slashed an artery with his kunai thoroughly, and the blood had been gushing out like a river. Was there that much blood in a human body? He was sure he would remember the man's face, his shocked face, the blood. Even without Sharingan he was sure he'd remember every single detail of it, and that didn't make him feel stronger. It didn't make him feel prideful, it made him feel scared of what he was, a tool made for murder, a thief of lives. That's what Naruto had called him, and yet he hadn't answered. He knew Ketan Jutsus, he could use one. Instead of having Naruto expend one of his explosive tags, he knew how costly those things were. He had pride if he could have a couple, but even his father had been against it. Too much cost, unnecessary, especially if he could use the fire release. Now they were surrounded by brigands and mobsters, and they needed a way out he could provide, but he was simply too scared to even start making the hand signs. Yeah, he's here all right, Anko exclaimed. So, got any ninja plan that doesn't involve us getting blown to smithereens? Yes, and for that I'm sorry, Naruto muttered, and as soon as he did that, he dashed out of the group, heading straight for the brigand that seemed the less bulky, and that, seeing the demon charging at him, with cold blue eyes, and an explosive tag in hand, decided he didn't want to die young and moved aside, letting the blur of orange pass through with ease, and as he did that, he unluckily slipped on the ground, getting back up only to see that the boy in question had been the one to make him fall, by grabbing his leg while dashing next to him, and leaving the explosive tag attached to it fizzling. The explosion broke the circle, as smear and blood flew in the air, before dropping down, leaving a small crater behind, and Naruto, outside of the circle of brigands, now reduced to 5 elements, of which one, not too near the pulverized enemy that is, was heavily wounded. Come on! Is this the best you got? In a moment, the stalemate was broken, as the remaining ones launched themselves in pursuit of Naruto, who was their objective. The demon of the Kyuubi had to die, for all the damage caused 2 years ago to them. Anko looked at the mass of brigands not caring the slightest about them. One was shivering and the other was a girl. All they wanted was the demon's blood, and strangely, Anko found herself watching them leave, still holding tightly onto her kunai. She had seen the blood, she saw the corpses near her, but still, why was her hand clenching tightly the weapon's handle? She realized it then. She was afraid. Itachi had taken a life out of instinct. Naruto had done the same, albeit indirectly, to get all the attention of the enemies on him, and considering how much an explosive tag could cost, he nevertheless did it for them, and now they both stood there, in silence, not knowing what to do, until, finally, Anko cracked the silence around them. Hi, clanboy, the appellative did wonder to wince Itachi out of his sort of fear trance. Shouldn't we go help our friend? You're right, Anko-san, sorry, Itachi muttered, quickly shaking his head as he looked towards the direction Naruto had taken. We must hurry. While Naruto can run, he doesn't have the advantage in this terrain. They might trap him, or a half-snake half-Orochimaru slithered swiftly in front of the 2 genins, arriving before any of the 2 could register his presence, and his face was clearly angered. What excuses do you brats have? His tone wasn't pleasant, at all, and both actually would have preferred being once more surrounded by the bandits, than actually confronting the snake sanin, whose looks swiftly moved from them, who were gaping like fishes, not able to talk, to the corpses around, and through his innate sense of track, and his understanding, hissed slightly. Someone among you had the guts to at least put up a fight, and with that, the snake sanin slithered away, leaving the 2 genins behind, shivering, not only from the fear, but also from guilt, as they couldn't actually hide it was the truth. Sure, if it had come to it they would have fought and tried to kill. On the other hand, Orochimaru was furious, but for completely different reasons, and none of them could actually be told. So tell me, what does Danzo wish to say, little rootling? The snake sanin hissed slowly, as the boy, barely the same age as his genin, replied in a monotone voice. Danzo-sama wishes to convince the weapon to seek the aid of Root, having him drop out the shinobi program, or forcing him to make the choice and selecting Root. The young Root member spoke slowly. And what if I refuse the order? As Orochimaru said that, with an amused eye wink, the young Root boy didn't wince, since, after all, it wasn't the first time the snake sanin proved to be difficult, more than the other Root associates, certainly. Then we ask you do not interrupt our actions, as Danzo-sama had deemed it likely that, making the boy fail his mission, he'd be removed by the shinobi program altogether. Now that, on the other hand, piqued the snake sanin's attention. Why would failing a C-rank mission throw him out of the shinobi program? Emotions make people weak, Orochimaru-sama, that is the reason Danzo-sama asked me to give. And with those words, the rootling shunshined away. Obviously Orochimaru could have lunged at the boy any split second, tearing apart his head and gnawing it like it were a strawberry, but it wouldn't yield much. Danzo never sent him someone who actually knew something, and the rootling didn't know probably anything else but what he had been meant to say. It was only when he had met that Kakuro freak, because nobody wears bright purple jackets and makes that nervous tick with the glasses without being called a freak, that he had understood. The doll was ready. It was packed in a nice birthday package, and it held a simple birthday gift card on it. That had indeed made him furious, as obviously he had torn apart the thing to reveal an empty package, making the doll maker shocked at the disappearance of the doll. He had offered reparations immediately. Good thing that for all his pride he was a weakling, or maybe he simply knew Orochimaru's way of working people who were late, unfulfilling, or simply people that made him angry. So he had the blasted doll already ready, in a packet, and when he comes out of that damnable freak's laboratory his genin team isn't there. It didn't take much to sense them, being surrounded by brigands, far off the distance, and with a simple body-shedding technique, coupled with becoming half-snake, he had reached them in time and with a lot of anger to work out. Naruto had managed to reach the road, by the time the remaining 5 thieves caught on him, one whipping a bolt straight through his right leg, and making him yell in pain, clutching his wounded leg as he fell on the ground, as the others, with a grin, moved closer, with blackjacks at the ready. They didn't want to make this quick, they wanted it long and personal. So the demon is finally going to die, thank Kami, one of them, a scar running through his face from his left eyebrow to his right cheek, swiftly pummeled the tip of the blackjack straight into Naruto's stomach, making him gasp in pain, as the boy's right hand revealed a kunai that slammed hard into the man's right foot, making him yell and jump backwards, but not fast enough for the boy not to fall on him, pointing the bloodied kunai at his throat, his idea being to try and have a hostage. The pain in the leg, however, didn't help, when one of the others surrounding him flung him to the side, hitting his ribcage with a full-force kick, and sending him to cough blood while sprawling on the ground. Even when wounded, the demon still fights, truly a monster, another one said, his blackjack immediately falling on the boy's knee. They were all veterans of giving pain, non-lethal pain, as they all grew up coercing other people, and that simply increased until they became a band. They even had a sort of family, until the QB found it fitting to destroy their homes, leaving them nothing more than a ragtag group. Now, how could they pass up on their revenge, having received a tip that the demon would be in town that day? They couldn't, so poor Tanaka, the only one who knew how to do a henge, had been chosen to get them away from their team leader, since nobody would have messed with the snake sanin. He was too famous, too strong, and extremely cruel with his enemies, as it had been told. Naruto cursed his bad luck. He didn't have another explosive note, and he was flaring with pain, so he did the only thing possible. He took out another explosive note. Immediately, it began sizzling, and the brigands jumped backwards, not wanting to become gory messes like the clearly suicidal kid. Finally committing suicide, brat. As they yelled that, the boy limped up on his still sane leg, and with a wheeze, he let the explosive tag touch the ground, to reveal it as nothing more than a ramen coupon, camouflaged with a henge to resemble an explosive tag. "I'd die fighting," he muttered, spitting blood from his mouth to the side, a kunai in his trembling hands, as he eyed, with his blue eyes, the enemies around him. One of the 5 was limping from where his kunai had planted itself in his foot, and probably he'd be the last to charge. The other 4, however, seemed pretty top-notch. Why did people always aim at his legs? He knew it was a common practice. Mobility was the ninja's life. Without it, a ninja was usually nothing more than a dead man, but still, his knee was clearly twisted out of place. His other leg, while sane-ish, had the grazing wound of the bolt, and he was quite actually sure he was suffering from severe internal bleeding, and maybe 1 or 2 of his ribs had been, if not broken, at least twisted painfully, as breathing was something that came to him with difficulty, as his vision was also losing focus. Well, let's put an end to this scourge on Earth. One of the brigands scowled, and then, he was the first to charge. Naruto knew he was going to die, so pain became, silently, a second feat, especially when he rotated to the side, letting both his hands give strength to the push of his kunai through the man's hand that wielded the blackjack, letting it be severed, as blood spluttered all over the blond boy's face and hair, before being grabbed by the hem of the dirty and ragged coat, to be thrown behind him, at his assailants, in an attempt to slow them down and concentrate on the second one. At that moment, pain jolted once more through his system, and he fell down. He could have sworn this was extremely familiar to him, as, once he did fall, he heard the sound, the usual sound, of a sword extending. Kusanagi the next moment, he felt himself being lifted upwards. His eyes, blurring already, stared deeply into the golden ones of Orochimaru, who looked back at him with a narrowed expression. Was it hate, anger, hatred? It wasn't worry. There was never worry in Orochimaru's eyes, but there was something in there, something different. It was perplexity. With that, Naruto let darkness claim him, as he was too tired to actually even think straight, blood slowly dribbling down his body. When he woke up, he realized with a groan that he smelled tea leaves, and that he was being piggybacked by Anko, and that they were on their way back. Still, he was glad he was alive. To die without knowing the truth would have been pretty much bad, but maybe Kami would have answered his questions, he hoped. With his groan, however, Anko exclaimed, making the poor boy's head ring, from the cheery exclamation of the purple-haired kunoichi, "Sensei! He's awake!" With that, Orochimaru turned around to look at Naruto, while Itachi, sighing in relief, locked his gaze on his friend, who seemed to have gone through hell. "Good," the snake sanin said, "drop him now, Anko-chan." With that, the kunoichi did so, and Naruto, gasping as he fell on the ground, felt a small pain on his backside, but except for that, realized with shock that his legs seemed to be fine. "Now, what did you do wrong, boy?" Orochimaru asked, looking at Naruto with clinical gaze, making the boy whimper. "I left my team behind?" he hazarded, as Orochimaru shook his head. "No, you left your team behind, while being unprepared. The last part was stressed, 1 more explosive tag, and with them in tow following you, you could have neatly sent them in disarray. So why did you have only 1? They're costly, sensei, and kept under lock," Naruto muttered. "It's difficult to get them, and at night they hide the chest somewhere," he added. "Then I'll teach you an E-rank jutsu that you will find certainly a way to utilize. Otherwise, don't think I'll take kindly to having wasted time with you." With those words, Orochimaru pulled out from his sleeve a seemingly normal piece of cloth. "Look and memorize. Even a kid can pull this off." With a swift movement, the cloth became sort of like a canvas. However, it depicted the scenery behind the snake sanin, effectively making him slightly invisible. This is a derivative of the henge system, Kakuremino no Jutsu. It's a general skill of hiding. Now, how could you use it to your advantage? Naruto frowned. He was asked that after having just recently woken up, and having been thrown on the ground, but he knew better than to say anything, so he began thinking, for a brief moment, as Orochimaru's gaze settled on the boy, in wait for an answer. "I could use it to hide behind a wall of the shop, have a bunch and exit the shop, and then see where the explosive tags are hidden." As he mulled that thought, Orochimaru nodded. "Good, remember that it's like using a henge, but you must carefully memorize your surroundings. to be sure to recreate it perfectly. If you do fail, it might give problems. Remember to keep your thoughts always on the image you wish to create, understood? As Naruto nodded, the snake sanin added, this is merely a visual hiding, as chakra, hearing, tremor sense, or anything like that will, stressing the word, make you still traceable, but with a civilian shopkeeper you shouldn't have any trouble. As he said that, Naruto winced. But the ninja weapon shopkeeper is a ninja, sensei. As soon as Naruto said that, the snake sanin replied with a sort of matter-of-fact tone. That he is, well then it seems there will be no way for you to obtain more explosive tags, unless you happen to find the Ryos for it. And with that, Orochimaru gave his back to the boy, to start walking back towards the village once more. As they walked, Itachi's gaze every now and then moved to Naruto, who had started to walk on his own feet, albeit still perplexed. He did have a twisted knee, didn't he? Orochimaru-sensei fixed it with his injections, Itachi whispered, moving next to the boy. You were a mess of blood when he reached you, you got lucky, you know? You're a damn idiot. You nearly died, you imbecile. Was the probably subtle meaning of the question. Yeah brat, don't scare us like that. Playing hero doesn't suit you. We could have handled them together. Enko exclaimed, trying a smile. But they wanted me, not you, Naruto said, letting his gaze slowly move downwards towards the dirt of the road. So I couldn't bring my problems to you. As he said that, a sharp knuckle hit came from the side of Enko. For once, Itachi actually was glad it had been the kunoichi, since he too would have done the same. Bullshit. We're a team. If somebody messes with my Naruchan, I'll mess with their guts. As she said that, with a wink, she then turned to Sensei, to exclaim, Sensei. When do I get to sign the snake summon contract? I want to do that cool snake move soon. Naruto's face grew puzzled. Did the girl actually call him Naruchan? He didn't even care she was getting snake summons or not. Was he really being called Naruchan? That made him feel fuzzy inside, as he kept on walking next to his teammates. Well, he understood the lesson clearly. Next time somebody tried to mess with his team, he'd butcher them like the worthless scum the bastards clearly were, leaving not even one behind. They wanted a demon? They wanted a monster? Then they'd come and get their share of blood. He wouldn't go down without a fight anymore. He wouldn't run anymore. He'd slaughter them all and drink upon their blood. If their fear turned to hatred of him, then his hatred would be their doom. His eyes subtly grew colder, as he mulled over thoughts of what he'd do and to who he'd do it. He had people who cared for him, he'd protect them all, through blood and steel, but to do that, he needed strength. Meanwhile, at Enko's words, Itachi slightly blinked his eyelids. Did the snake Sennin actually dote on the girl that much? There was something, in him, a slight feeling of jealousy that was actually taking place, but he shook it out of his head. After all, it was obvious his sensei would do the best to have them all on par. If it meant spending more time with Enko, instead of him and Naruto, then it was fine. He could always train with Naruto to get stronger. Something, however, was bugging him. Never mind the chakra control exercises, but when would his sensei start teaching them elemental jutsus? He could use the katan, but Naruto and Enko seemingly didn't display any elemental ninjutsu, nor had they been trained in them. It could prove a fatal weakness, if they were in a pinch. He understood that maybe Orochimaru was taking things slowly, but there was something strange in the way he deliberately avoided teaching much to them. Heck, the E-rank academy jutsu, something that had been overlooked by both of them, had actually been the only new jutsu taught to Naruto, and only in an effort to help him steal better. He couldn't help but let his Uchiha sense flare a bit, at the thought that his sensei could be, with intent, slowing down their growth intentionally. It was a bad thought, and he quickly shoved it away, but he did promise to himself he'd speak with Naruto later on. He didn't like the gaze of the boy's eyes, not one bit. That night, when they camped, Itachi looked at the blonde boy, his childhood friend, and whispered, Naruto. As he said that, the boy's eyes got to attention, looking back at the Uchiha, who, keeping a seemingly emotionless face, queried, How are you feeling? For what? Naruto asked back, perplexed, not understanding the question. You killed a man, didn't you? As Itachi pointed that out, Naruto's eyes slightly opened for a second, before the boy closed them, letting his thoughts run amok in his head, trying to discern if there was something, anything, that should have been there and that wasn't. Seems like I did, he replied calmly. I killed 3. 2 for the explosion and 1 with my kunai. The blood was everywhere, wasn't it? He kind of asked with a small grin. It was, Itachi whispered back, staring perplexed at the boy's slightly shaking shoulders. But it's not something to smile about. Naruto, we took lives, today, he added. They came at us, Itachi, Naruto whispered back. They would have killed us had we not killed them, he added. Still, we took their lives, Naruto, we became no better than them. At that, the Uchiha was shocked, when his clothes were grabbed by Naruto's hand, whose eyes, blazing in their furious blue anger, looked deeply into the black ones of Itachi, and in a hiss that sounded murderous, he muttered back to his friend, We are better than them, Itachi. We survived where they died because they were weak, while we are strong. We are ninja while they were thieves, scum, worthless of being called human. We will always be higher than them, always be atop them, and they'd better have learned the lesson, those who saw and those who will know. If you mess with a demon you are bound to die. With that, the boy's face grew perplexed and afraid, as he let go of Itachi, muttering in a sorrowful voice. I'm sorry, I don't know what took me, I'm sorry, he added, once more, as he sheepishly looked to the ground, letting the Uchiha to catch his breath. This was Naruto, alright, not the one from before, the one who had called himself a demon. Maybe, out of the two, the most shocked of the all deal was the boy himself. He'd always been kind, always taking in the insults, the glances, the damages and the hurt. He'd done it because he thought he earned it, or maybe because he thought it would be his life, as the hero that jailed the Kyuubi. Now, however, he had realized he might bring harm to others, and he didn't want that. If he had to become a demon, that was Itachi's reading of his thought patterns, then he'd become one, if only to protect them. You're really too kind, Naruto, Itachi whispered, ruffling the boy's hair. Ah, Anko said with sparkling eyes at the scene, I should bring a camera next time. So kawaii. She did, however, have a small dribble of blood coming down her nose, which didn't mean anything good, if the two boys could actually realize it. Orochimaru, instead, looked at the scene with vivid interest, more like clinical interest, actually. Their return to Konoha came without trouble, in the late afternoon, but Orochimaru did slightly tense, at the smell in the air, the smell of toads. Orochimaru-kun. The yell, coming from a burly man with long spiky white hair, and sporting wooden sandals, made the three genins wince. Nobody had ever called their sensei with the kun and had survived. Nobody had even dared doing that for all the money offered, or the threats, or the dare. Not even the drunkest of fools could do that, and survive. Instead this man, with an oil forehead protector, did. Naruto winced, realizing who it was. Uncle Jiraiya? He couldn't call him that any longer, could he? He had been disowned, so it's not like he could call the Toad Sage with an appellative like that. He couldn't. Jiraiya, Orochimaru muttered, narrowing his eyes at the man in front of him. Why is my ex-teammate in Konoha? Ah, you're offending me, Oro-kun. Can't I come see good old Grumpy you? At the appellative used, Orochimaru's forehead sported a nervous tick mark. If this is what you came to do, then you can leave. You've seen enough, I suppose. At those hissed words, Jiraiya shrugged, before turning his gaze to the boys behind their sensei, and showing a sort of surprised look. Gaki. Not saying anything to your uncle? I thought you'd have already tackled me too. At those words, Naruto actually dashed forward like a bullet, clinging onto the Toad Sage's vest. Now that's more like it, Jiraiya replied with a chuckle, before ruffling the boy's hair. Sorry I couldn't come earlier, but I had to keep up with my contacts, and it took some time, he whispered to the boy, who simply shook his head, wiping off the tears. Doesn't matter, uncle, doesn't matter, he replied, sporting a sort of happy smile, albeit his eyes seemed still teary. Well, call me crazy, but I didn't expect grumpy old Orochimaru to get an entire genin team. He usually preferred to mentor only one student at a time. At those words from the Toad Sage, Orochimaru's eyes narrowed, while Itachi's mind clicked. Probably the reason Orochimaru doted on Anko was because the sanin was used to going on a one-on-one teaching method, meaning he wouldn't be doing it on purpose, to seemingly ignore training both him and Naruto, but because it was his method. Can the fool who tried to peek on Tsunade bathing stop speaking, and hand me back one of my genins? Orochimaru replied, with ill-hidden anger in his voice as his eyes seemed to promise a long and extremely painful death to the Toad Sage. Well, Gaki, don't worry about grumpy Orochimaru, I'll come by later to speak with you again. Without the old and wrinkled man, as he said that with a chuckle, he waved goodbye to the group, and left, while Orochimaru, still fuming, grabbed his team and headed towards the Hokage Tower, to report. He was fuming not only for his meeting with his ex-teammate, that always made him leave angrier than before, but because, with him being in the village, Orochimaru was forced to relocate, the place one of his experiments was going to be held. He had no doubt his teammate would pick up his experiments, if he kept doing them here, probably called back by his old fool of a sensei too. He had to act quickly. As they entered the Hokage's office, to report, Orochimaru had already produced from within his mouth something that had made Anko mentally yuck. The package, that, luckily, seemed to be devoid of saliva, and looked seemingly dry. So you successfully completed the mission, I take it? Minato spoke, as the package was gently deposited on his desk by the snake sanin himself. Yes, it was an easy walk, Hokage-sama, Orochimaru replied, narrowing his eyes as the Hokage seemingly shifted, uncomfortably. I understand then, that there is nothing that went wrong? Hokage-sama, what could possibly have gone wrong? At the question, asked by the snake sanin himself, Minato found himself narrowing his cold blue eyes. Well, I received a report, from Tanzaka's lord, that some corpses were found skewered, butchered or outright blown to bits out of his town and in the direction of Konoha. Did you have any hostile encounters? Before Anko or Itachi could speak, Orochimaru was already there, answering. No. As the three genin stood in silence, the snake sanin kept talking. We met no trouble, nor enemies, along our way back to Konoha. As he finished speaking, he would have smirked, seeing the discomfort on the Hokage's face. Danzo, you old fool. Trying to sell me out too, huh? Like if your root could have stood a chance of bringing him under your guard. You had the guts to try, however. With those thoughts in mind, the sanin watched Minato nod, before turning his gaze to Irika. Well then, Yumino-san, do deliver them the payment for their mission, and, as they all lined up, except Orochimaru, who having a bank account would simply get his check deposited there, the others received their Ryo bills. 40,000 Ryos, something that did make Naruto wince, and sport a happy smile at the sight of the money, entering his wallet, and closing it tightly. At that display of happiness, Orochimaru narrowed his eyes at the Hokage's face. It seemed to be showing discomfort, wasn't it? The man probably felt a seething anger for not having thrown out of the village him, the snake Sanin, with the accusation of having lost the QB jinchuriki. He could already see the plan he and Danzo had prepared, have the brat either accused of having failed the mission on purpose, and force him out of the shinobi program, or have him accused of having lost the QB jinchuriki. It could have worked, had he not been Orochimaru. Probably Jiraiya would have fallen for it full front, the damnable idiot always ranting about him being old. He knew he always struck a nerve when he said that. As they were about to leave, a red-haired woman walked in, unannounced, and just as she did, Naruto immediately slid straight behind Anko. While seemingly on cue, Itachi moved right next to the kunoichi in question, stiffening slightly. Kushina Namikaze walked in, a smile on her face soon dwindling, as she saw Orochimaru, one of the legendary sanins, a purple-haired kunoichi, Itachi, the firstborn of her now cold friend Mikoto, and a speck of blonde hair behind the two genins, who seemingly seemed to be doing his best to look interested in something within his hands, noticeably, a stack of ramen coupons. I heard the team with the package had come back. Is everything alright with it? As Kushina queried that, moving closer to Minato, the three genin subtly placed themselves straight behind their sensei. After all, now they could leave. Yes, everything is fine. Oh, you're dismissed, teammate. As Minato realized the group was probably waiting him for being dismissed, he did so, and seeing them leave, this time the blonde boy seemingly by chance moving at the head of the other two, and thus once more being barred from view, he couldn't help but sigh. Well, I'm sure Katsumi-chan is going to love her new doll, Kushina replied. Her birthday is coming soon, after all. With that, and a small smile, Kushina grabbed the package, and frowned for a moment. Kokuyo-san has probably lost the birthday card. Well, I'll have to make another one. And with that, the woman left. And just as Minato was about to let another team in, Iruka took the moment to whisper, Hokage-sama. I looked closely at Naruto, he said, and he had dried blood on his trousers and on his sleeve, albeit it was stint and probably washed thoroughly, he added. Iruka-san, Minato sighed. Remember, they might have hunted in the bushes for a dinner or for surviving lessons, could be animal blood, for all we know. Hi, Hokage-sama, albeit, what Iruka wanted to say was that he thought Naruto had been wounded, and shouldn't have been kept in active service for a while. Orochimaru, once outside the tower, turned to Anko, while the other two boys stood nearby. You're all dismissed, except you. Anko-chan will be going over to my place, to sign the snake summon contract. And with those words he moved, a gleefully chirpy Anko behind, who waved goodbye to both Itachi and Naruto. The Uchiha looked at the blonde boy, who, seemingly unfazed, scratched the back of his head, looking at the sky. Well, in the end you didn't get to buy a souvenir for Sasuke or Mikoto-san, Naruto muttered, and you got into danger because of me. I'm sorry, he added, trying an wry smile. Itachi sighed, once more, now definitively marking the sigh as his trademark, before he sported a smile, and shaking his head, replied, a shinobi's life is always filled with dangers, and I'm sure they weren't, actually, expecting me to get them something at all. Want to come over for dinner? At that question, Naruto shook his head. Uncle Jiraiya's in town finally. After 2 years I'm sure he'll treat me to ramen if I wait for him in my apartment. And with those words he smiled back, warmly, to Itachi, before waving goodbye while dashing off to his one-room apartment. The Uchiha looked at the blonde bullet go, before walking, on his own accord, towards the Uchiha compound. He was sure his father would be proud of him getting the first taste of blood on his hands. He was sure his mother would be worried, and that Sasuke would simply pout cutely about Onaizen. But he couldn't help but feel a frown coming up, thinking about Naruto, who would go back to an empty apartment, maybe trashed, or maybe not, without no one to speak to, and waiting, hopefully waiting, for someone to come around. He couldn't help it just didn't seem the right thing. It was 5 minutes later, as he took a shortcut, passing through the park, that he saw the Toad Sage speaking to the ex-Hokage, the third, while the latter was sitting on a bench, the first was standing up. Careful, but curious, he decided to move nearby, only to see the third eyeing him, waving at him with a small smile and gesturing him to come closer. If it isn't Fugaku-san's son, Hiruzen said, just recently returned from your first C-rank mission, right? At those words, Itachi nodded, just as Jiraiya excused himself, having to go meet his godson. Sarutobi-sama, Itachi said, making a polite bow, it is correct. We completed our assignment, and came back as fast as possible. As he said that, the old man's eyes softened for a brief moment. You know when someone kills, the first time, something undoubtedly breaks. As he spoke those words, Itachi's eyes bulged in shock. Obviously he hadn't expected the third Hokage to be a saint, having killed obviously in his life, and he knew he was known as the god of shinobis, or the professor, but to catch on so quickly, and with Orochimaru lying to the current Hokage. Oh, don't worry, it's not like it's the first time Orochimaru lied about not having killed anyone on a mission, Hiruzen replied, with a sigh. He hates wasting time filling the papers to justify his reasons, so he lies about it, a bad habit, but it's not something I'm surprised in. Itachi sighed in relief, as however, the third spoke again. Tell me, what happened? As Itachi slowly spoke, telling the third Hokage everything that happened, Hiruzen frowned slightly, before letting his gaze turn sad for a brief moment. Well, it's the way of the shinobi to shed blood. I didn't expect it would be that soon. But still you did nothing wrong, Itachi-kun, Hiruzen spoke. You did what you had to do, protect your teammates and fellow leaf shinobis. But Naruto's actions do leave me puzzled. Itachi had an awry expression, as his black eyes looked at the kids that had been playing in the park, and that were now being taken to their homes, by their mothers, since the afternoon was leaving the place to the night, a thing that even the third Hokage noticed, making the old man smile bitterly. Well, it just seems like yesterday, that you all were playing in the park. Itachi nodded before replying. Naruto stopped playing around a long time ago, didn't he? To that question, Hiruzen nodded, reminiscing a bit of a sad memory. He had hoped to see him at the park. He didn't have to actually like a decision made by the current Hokage, so he wanted to at least make it right. Asuma was already an adult, and with him, and his older brother, out of the house, it did feel a bit lonely, especially after Biwako's death. Sure, the Hokage had disowned the boy, calling him disrespectful, but Hiruzen knew perfectly well how much of bullshit that statement was. Active? Yes. Loud? Yes. Disrespectful? Calling the ex-Hokage Gigi wasn't disrespectful. It even made him feel better, and a boy has, if not a right, at least a leniency, to say no. So he was at the park, in wait, hoping to see that hyperactive bundle of blonde hair and orange clothes. At the very least, Minato had still made it clear that he was still a hero who held the Kyuubi within. A pity he was forced to point out that the Iron Seal was weak, and that led to the rumor. That soon became truth among the general population, that Naruto had been thrown out because he was a danger to Minato and his family. So, he just wanted to know how the boy felt, and to suggest he could come home with him. He had already set the wards to let him in, after all. He didn't see him at first, but he heard the subtle change in the people around him, who all slightly tensed, and went to grab their children. His eyes looked up, and he wasn't surprised when he saw Naruto marching, albeit a bit hesitantly, towards the bench where he was. He had made a small smile, encouraging the boy to come closer, and then, the boy had bowed. It had taken a moment for Hiruzen to recompose his normal expression. Shock wouldn't have helped in easing the boy, but there wasn't even a single neuron in his brain that could actually understand why a 5-year-old would bow to him, in such a way that was more beckoning of a clan's head asking for a really important favor. He had wanted to say something, but the boy was actually shivering, and as he realized he was trying to speak, he silenced himself, in wait for the words. Sarutobi-sama, the boy was actually trying to find the correct way to express himself. Usually he'd come over with a GG and yell something. Right now, instead, he looked more like a nervous wreck of emotions, one worse than the other. It was something Hiruzen couldn't muster his courage for, something that never lacked. No matter the odds, he'd sacrifice himself for the second Hokage repeatedly, relive that scene for hundreds of times, all the pain. Rather than watch a boy of 5 years, the boy he had actually thought of as a grandchild, act like that, to him. He simply knelt down in the front of the boy and hugged him tightly. It's all right, Naruto, it's all right. As he patted the boy's back, he realized with a frown that the clothes weren't simply dirty from not having been washed. They were torn, there was dried blood, and the blonde boy seemed to still be in pain, as he could feel him shiver after patting the general area where the wound was. Who did this to you? He had asked, his eyes narrowing as his emotions were turning to a twirling mass of seething anger and rage. No one, really, the boy replied meekly. He didn't want to say it? Why wouldn't he? Had Hiruzen been able to read minds, he'd have discovered that the boy didn't want, even after being the one wounded, to give trouble to the once nice lady. She could have slipped the grip on the knife. After all, Naruto, Hiruzen murmured, with a sort of comforting tone, just as the blonde-haired boy, with his blue eyes, actually looked at the old man, and grabbing all the bits and pieces of courage he could find, asked him a simple, yet extremely hard-to-answer question. Can you teach me how to become Hokage? Hiruzen recalled his reasons. He just wanted the truth, a truth that, sadly, he knew of. One he couldn't speak of, one that he, alongside Minato, Kushina, and Jiraiya, knew. Mulling over that fateful night, he couldn't help but sport a sad face. So much had happened in the span of so little time. That he did, Itachi-kun, Hiruzen said before adding, now, however, this old man here took enough of your time, didn't he? You should head back home. I'm sure your mother is waiting to hear how your mission went. As he pointed that out, Itachi nodded, dashing off to reach the Uchiha compound. While that happened, Naruto was waiting patiently in his one-room apartment, sighing in relief at the sight of nothing seemingly out of place, nor explosive tags set to detonate with him inside. The noise of the wooden sandals came from outside, and with a bit of anticipation, Naruto waited, as the Toad Sage actually entered his apartment with a sort of happy grin, holding a big scroll within his hands. Well, since your birthday has passed, at least twice, with me out of Konoha, I brought you a gift. With that, the man unraveled the scroll, revealing a long set of names written upon it, his own, that of Minato Namake's, and many others, with enough space for more to be written upon. Uncle Jiraiya? What's this? Naruto queried, perplexed, as the old man with spiky white hair exclaimed, it's the Toad's summoning scroll. For 2 missed birthdays, I'm letting you sign it right now. Come on, I know you want to have awesome Toad partners to help you fight. As the Toad Sage tried his best to convince the boy, Naruto frowned, looking at the name of his father in there. What if I don't like toads? At that question, Jiraiya raised a perplexed expression. Why wouldn't you? Toads are awesome. There's this frog kata style that's really, but they're yucky to eat. Jiraiya's face paled at that remark. No, you didn't actually eat a toad, did you, boy? You can't have done that. As the sanin grabbed both of the boy's shoulder, shaking him, he exclaimed, I can't believe you barred yourself from the toad summons. He shrieked. I was hungry. Naruto defended himself from the accusation, and those toads seemed good to eat. They did give me stomach ache, however. Well, Jiraiya sighed, his gaze turning softer at the reason, as he dropped the boy. Look at me carefully. And repeat. The man bit his thumb, making the correct hand signs slowly, before dropping his hand on the ground and exclaiming, Kuchios no jutsu. At that, a small tadpole appeared, that wiggled for a bit before disappearing in a puff of smoke. A tadpole? Naruto queried, is that the might of toad summons? No. Just well, if you haven't signed a contract, as Jiraiya rolled back up his own toad's contract, you can try the summoning scroll, and you should end up near the most attuned to you animal summon if it's snakes. Mind you, yell out loud you know Orochimaru, or they'll eat you fast, the man said, immediately. And don't worry if you end up a bit far, they should get you back here, if you ask nicely. At that, Naruto gulped. I have a mission, most certainly, tomorrow or maybe training, so just try and repeat the motion. I'm sure that if you don't put any chakra in it, nothing is going to happen. At those words, Naruto, albeit uneasily, nodded, and started going through them. It took maybe 5 minutes, before the toad sage deemed himself satisfied, and with a smile, he ruffled the blonde boy's head, before saying, How about we go eat some ramen to celebrate, huh? Can I invite Enko-chan too? Naruto queried back, a sort of sparkle in his eyes. Enko-chan? Did you get it on with your teammate? You're a bit too young, and she's a bit too old, you know, especially at this age. As the sanin said that, Naruto sported a puzzled look, before replying, What are you talking about, uncle? As the blue eyes looked with perplexity at the elderly man, Jiraiya couldn't help but sigh. So, what's the reason for inviting one of your genins to eat with us? You don't want a one-on-one with your uncle? As the sanin said that, Naruto shook his head. It's not that, uncle. It's just I think she might be alone right now, and I'm sure she needs someone to talk with. As he pointed that out, Jiraiya's perplexed face made the blonde boy add, You see, she's gone with Orochimaru-sensei to sign the snake contract, but he'll probably have her go immediately afterwards. Sensei doesn't waste time around, and she usually eats alone. And you know this because the white spike ninja said, letting his right hand move in a circular motion, beckoning the boy to speak more. Well, she usually comes around to eat with me, Naruto replied sheepishly. I thought I could invite her for once. As he added that, scratching the back of his head, Jiraiya nodded. Well then, Gaki, go to her apartment, knock and present yourself like a dashing Romeo, and everything will be fine. I'll wait for you at Ichiraku's ramen, so get to it, quick, quick. Naruto didn't need to be told again, as he took out of his apartment as fast as he could, knowing all too well the road Anko lived in. He didn't waste any time, taking all the necessary shortcuts he had, over the course of many months of getting to know her, learned of, and reaching her door with a barely visible sweat on his forehead. Just as he was about to knock, however, he heard some soft chuckles coming from within. Soft female chuckles of different girls, probably. No way. He let you sign the— Yeah, he did. I'm so jealous. Say, is it true that the demon boy murdered the entire town? The blonde boy in question held his breath, waiting for the reply that, actually, came after a couple of brief minutes. Who? Him? Nah. He's a scrawny weak thing. He did kill a couple of thieves in cold blood. In today's mission though, the reply that came, clearly from Anko's voice, left something stingy in his chest, but he waited, patiently. Maybe there was more. Indeed there was. Killed them? In cold blood? Did he lick their blood, or eat their corpses? Well, the corpses were a mess, but— I told you! Anko-chan. You're so unlucky to have that boy in your team. I'm sure he's got to have problems. Well, but— and there's no need to defend him. He's not here right now, so come on, tell us everything. But Anko-chan. We want to know, don't keep us away from the truth. What horrible things does that monster do? Naruto stood very still, before turning around and, without stopping, running away once more, to Ichiraku's ramen. It seemed Anko had company that night. Obviously he shouldn't have expected her to be alone. The only one who was alone most of the time was him, so it was obvious Anko had friends. Being a war orphan didn't mean anything, being the Kyuubi jinchuriki, a disowned for being disrespectful child, and having a weak seal? That meant something instead. It meant being lonely, being stared at, being growled at, being hit, having things thrown at, having an apartment trashed. It meant not being able to have friends without risking them harmed. It meant loneliness. At least if he could speak with the Kyuubi, ask him something, like, why the hell did you have to ruin my life? Or things like that, but silence was all he heard. Only that, and nothing else. He reached Ichiraku's ramen just in time to stop on his tracks. Obviously there was a red-haired woman eating ramen, next to Jiraiya. The two were chatting, speaking normally. That was enough to make the boy turn tails for the moment. He'd come back later. He could try that summoning jutsu somewhere safe. The park was his objective. Now, night taking over the day, nobody around, so he couldn't mess it up, could he? He bit his thumb, and made the careful gestures with his hands before letting his hand touch the ground, as he muttered, in a barely audible voice, filled with worry on what he might be summoned to. Would it be toads, even though Uncle Jiraiya had said no? Would it be snakes? What else could it be? Cats? Would they forgive him for barbecuing a couple of cats? Kuchio's no jutsu, and then Naruto Uzumaki was gone in a small puff of smoke. Enko, she had just sent home her, now once more, friends, and was sighing, recalling all the things they had actually forced her to say, after putting the words directly in her mouth. Well, it's not like the blonde brat was going to know, and she was sure he'd forgive her. He was that polite, a pity nobody recognized it. Now, she was waiting for tomorrow to shove it straight in front of Clan's boy face that she would be going on a private trip, together with Sensei and 9 other genins, to a special place in the land of the sea, to undertake some special training that would finally put her on par with Itachi, and would mark Naruto as the dead last of the genin team. Sure, the boy was nice and cute, and he had helped them, but really, she was Sensei's favorite. Orochimaru Sensei had said so. She couldn't wait for tomorrow. If all went as planned for the trip, she'd be 12 by the time they'd reach the land of the sea. Sure, she'd miss the 10th of October, the Kyuubi's festival, and probably she'd take all of November in that special training regime that Orochimaru Sensei had planned. She simply couldn't help but skid over the wooden surface of her apartment. Her friends had come over to make peace, offered her dangos and tea, and everything seemed to have fixed itself. She was on a cloud, happily humming a tune as she opened her fridge for something to eat. Well, it was empty. She did eat some dangos as a light snack, but those wouldn't suffice. She headed outside, sure that the blonde boy wouldn't mind some company that late at night, but she frowned when, reaching his apartment, she didn't get a reply from within in the next minutes. She sighed, knowing all too well that the boy had to be at his second favorite place, Ichiraku's ramen stall. So that's where she went, and as she sat down, she recognized the white spiked hair of the toad hermit, Jiraiya, one of the 3 legendary sanins, having seen him hours before. The point was that the man seemed to be frowning, and was now looking at her with a strange smile. Oh, Enko-chan, isn't it? Where's Naruto? He asked, looking puzzled behind her, like the boy as meant to be there. I thought he was here, actually. He usually does come here to eat a lot. But why the hell are you asking me? As Enko replied that, I am actually chuckled. Naruto-kun comes here to celebrate whenever he can. As the girl with hazel hair spoke that with a sort of pride, Jiraiya's face gave off a smug grin, something that however made Tucci, just so casually, cut a radish with precise motions, even ninja-like, to say the least. Well, the Gaki said he wanted to invite you over to ramen, so I thought he had come to get you. Jiraiya replied with a sort of worried expression. He didn't come to get you. No, he didn't. I, stressing the word, went to look for him at his apartment, but he wasn't there, so I came here. Well, you probably missed each other, Jiraiya sighed. He'll come around. It's not like he could suddenly disappear from Konoha and go somewhere else. Somewhere. It has been a while since this happened, a voice called, in the dark and humid cave. You know, this is actually the first time, in a long, long time, that I'm actually seeing someone from Konoha in here, the voice said again, as Naruto, a bit perplexed, stared around, a lost look on his face. Why wasn't he seeing anything, at all? Yeah, usually they don't come around to getting near us. The way it had been phrased seemed strange, too, but the blonde boy was seemingly lost in this sort of ample cave, that had candles, lit on the sides of it, and that seemed to hold was looked like a scroll at the center of the area, surrounded by batches of eggs, and he had no idea who or what was talking. Well, anyway, he's here, let's ask the questions. Another voice, more cheery, exclaimed, as a loud series of groans echoed through the otherwise empty cave. Shut up, you! And who's the bastard biting my tail? A more snarling voice roared, as Naruto was now starting to think about what he had ended up being summoned to. Do I have a natural affinity to summon ghosts? He muttered to himself, just as a giant, golden, with a black slit and protruding eye appeared straight in front of him, making the boy scream in utter fright, as it revealed a chameleon. To be more precise, it revealed a giant chameleon, whose skin slowly turned into different shades, to resemble green foliage, with purple dots. Ghosts? Well, that's a new way of putting it. We're chameleons. The sort of overgrown lizard spoke, the sides of his head showing a sort of dinosaur-like face, as the thing had teeth, round, small, but clearly sharp teeth, and was sort of having a smug grin, as he carefully moved, on his limbs, towards the scroll at the center of the cave, his tail waving behind him. Well, let's ask the questions. First question, you see a bird perched on a branch, 5 branches above you, what do you do? As the chameleon asked that, he slowly got to the side of the scroll, as Naruto, still taking in the bizarre unfolding of events, took a deep breath. What would he do? Well, I'd try and knock him down with a stone, and then grab him when he falls near me, then I can have roast. As the spiky blonde hair of a boy said that, the chameleon mused over the answer for a while, before shrugging. Fine by me. Good, question time is over, so it's more than one, you lazy excuse of a lizard. Another voice snarled, revealing on the side of the cave a reddish and brownish scaled chameleon, that slowly, and kind of wobbly, walked downwards, getting to the other side of the scroll. Question number 2, what's your best mean of offense? Naruto took on a thoughtful appearance, looking at his equipment, not really understanding what he could answer with. A kunai? An explosive tag? It depended on the situation. After all, he couldn't fight a wolf with an explosive tag, it would be overkill, and those things were costly. Anything that works? He hesitated for a moment, as the red chameleon blinked for a second, before turning his gaze upwards. Is that actually a valid answer? As a low rumble was heard, Naruto raised a puzzled eyebrow. Weren't they in a cave? Why was the summon looking upwards? There was nothing. Oh yeah, chameleons, there was probably someone. Good, seems it's a valid answer. As the cold-blooded animal said that, a third chameleon appeared, from Naruto's side, his scales so precisely mimicking the flickering of the candles that it didn't even seem possible. And yet, that's what he had done. Moving towards the scroll, Naruto saw his scales assuming a sort of white tint, with blue hues and dark shades of gray in the mixture. He strolled behind the scroll, before querying, in a sort of hopeful voice. Well, 2 out of 4, let's see, do you like salamanders? At the question, the boy simply muttered back. What? Salamanders, you know, kind of poisonous thingies. With scales. As the chameleon said that, Naruto shook his head. Never saw one, but if it's poisonous I don't eat it, stating the obvious. In such a way, the white chameleon sported a grin. Well, Shiromari would probably be fine with a 3 out of 4 question, the green foliage chameleon said, as the cavern grumbled. Then, Naruto realized, much to his surprise, that the cavern wasn't actually a cavern, but a giant, an outright gigantic chameleon, who had assumed the semblance of a cavern, and had encircled him in there. Oh, Kami was all that the boy could mutter, as the titanic lizard of sorts slowly unwrapped, to reveal enormous golden eyes, so big that they actually emerged from his sockets, and the scales slowly assumed a more dark brownish hue, with dark green colors that seemed to give the impression that, between the scales, there were patches of moss. As the beast slowly moved away, grumbling something, it revealed the true location of the place Naruto had ended up in. Sure, there was a rocky ground, but because it seemed more like a plateau, surrounded by streams of water and harsh winds, with luscious jungle-like forests in the nearby proximity. Okay, where am I? Naruto queried, in a sort of worried voice. Well, this here is the home of the chameleon summons. We are in the land of rain, aim no kuni, and usually we do get someone to be summoners from the land of water, but they rarely even stay, as they usually all go whine to the salamanders. They think poison is much better than stealth. The gullible idiots. As the snarling red and brown chameleon spoke, he pointed with his tail to the contract. Well, anyway, you don't like poison, so we're fine with it. Here, grab a pencil and write in blood your name. As his tail tapped to the dotted line, Naruto walked forward hesitantly. Hush it, Ryo, let the boy get used to talking chameleons first. The white speckled with blue chameleon spoke, with a more eased voice. Is there anything I should know before I sign this? The boy turned to the more bright one, who didn't seem to be that much scary, and that didn't look like she had more teeth than the other one. Well, after you sign the contract, you are asked not to eat any chameleons. With that, Naruto nodded. There weren't chameleons in Konoha, or if there were, they were hidden pretty well. You should also help chameleons if you come across one that's in danger. Naruto nodded again. And generally you should kick in the ass any and all salamander summoner you come across, preferably in a painful way and with the use of chameleons. At that, the boy raised an eyebrow. You really don't like salamanders? Not one bit. Damn things always trying to boss their way in our territory. But we show them who's chief here, that we do. The green foliage chameleon exclaimed, as the boy, with a nod, wrote his name on the summoning scroll. Good. Now, if you ever happen to come across Shiromari, you'd mind telling her to come back home? At that question, coming from the white and gray speckled chameleon, Naruto looked perplexed. Is there something to recognize her by? Well, last time, she was summoned in Kubi no Kuni, by Koza Kubasaki, who was our summoner 50 or more years ago, but then she simply didn't come home. At that, Naruto remembered seeing that, above his name, there was that of Koza himself. Wait, so I'm basically your only summoner as of now? I did tell you salamanders are preferred by those damn idiots of Aim and Mizu, didn't I? At that, the boy nodded. Still, I never heard of chameleon summons, why should I have a natural affinity with them? At the question, asked with a curious expression, Ryo replied with a snarl, that seemed to be his normal tone of voice. Well, brat, either you ate one of everything else. At that, Naruto winced. He did actually eat a lot of different things. Or you simply share our common philosophy on living, or maybe heck, you've got some natural affinities in common with us, albeit usually the land of fire is famous for having fire affinity users, while here there are principally water affinity ones. Fire affinity? Like the Katan's Itachi does? At the exclamation from the boy, the white speckled chameleon replied with a chuckle. Katans are fire releases, which require fire affinity, while water releases are suetons, that require water affinity. Basically, a Konoha shinobi in here is as common as burning water. As a small geyser erupted nearby, Naruto looked at it, just as the white chameleon sported a narrowed gaze, if it could be called that. Well, ignoring the old faithful over there, I still haven't told you my name. I'm Tokage. That one over there trying to eat that bird, pointing with its paw at the green foliage one, is Koju. At that, the chameleon opened his mouth, extending his tongue as it struck true the flying bird, before making it swiftly disappear between his maws, making Naruto gulp. For a second he didn't want to die being eaten like that ever. Then there's Chameleon, the boss summon. He speaks very little, grumbles most of the time, Tokage explained. Do notice that, differently from other summons, we aren't much front attack related. Infiltration yes, support yes, head on attack? You'd probably be better off on your own for that. As Naruto nodded, he sheepishly scratched the back of his head. And do you know how I can get back home? Walking? Don't you like walking? Ryu snarled, sporting a grin that looked all the more savage, just as Koju burped, letting feathers fly out of his mouth, and Tokage shook its head, with a sigh. I'll puff you back to Konoha, now stand still and puff. As a cloud of smoke suddenly engulfed Naruto, he coughed for a moment before it dispersed to reveal Tokage, sheepishly making an awry smile. Ops, well, second time's the charm, right? Puff. And with that, Naruto did feel being transported. He just hoped he had ended up in the right place, this time. Arrival. Tsuchi was slowly mixing the broth for ramen, as he observed a strangely nervous Anko, a worried Ayam, and a tense Jiraiya. Well, the brat is late, the toad sanin said. I kind of wonder why he would be. Anko tensed. She did have a thought running in her mind. What if the boy had heard her talking with her friends sooner that day? What if he was now moping in a corner, crying his brat heart out, and then what if Jiraiya actually found him, consoled him, and got wind of it? She was going to have an extremely pissed sanin against her, that also was known to be Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage's sensei, meaning he could pretty much convince him to swap her of her team, and then she gulped at the thought, before shaking her head. No, the boy would have probably knocked, right? There was no way he could have heard anything. That thought lasted until a small puff of smoke later, Naruto appeared at Ichiraku's stall, sitting on the counter. Naruto? Jiraiya queried, perplexed, as Tsuchi gasped for a moment. Naruto-kun! I am exclaimed, giggling at the scene, as the boy, much silently, took his seat next to the toad sage. Where have you been, boy? Anko exclaimed, just as the blonde spiky ninja sighed. Everything's alright, Gaki? Well, you could say so. As he replied that, softly, he made his order, 1 pork ramen. Tsuchi-san, make it double. As he finished speaking, he slowly gulped down nervously, before muttering, I might have signed a summon contract. At that, Jiraiya's gaze narrowed down. Gaki! I told you not to do it. You should have waited for me. What if something happened to you? How can you be? Everything went fine, uncle, Naruto replied, a bit bitterly. I entered a contract with the chameleon summons, he added. Chameleon summons? Never heard of them. Just as the white spike sanin said that, Anko butted in. Ha! Chameleons! I got to sign the snake summons. They can eat your chameleons in a split second. As she was smiling at the thought of having bested Naruto once more, the boy simply gave her an awry smile. Yeah, I suppose they could. At that, Anko frowned. It wasn't even funny to try and smug something over Naruto's face. He simply didn't seem to care. He simply was too polite and gentle for that to make him feel bad. Or, if it did make him feel bad, he was too good to let it show. Dinner went by in a sort of strange silence, as even Jiraiya, trying to get more information out from the boy, got nothing. Just as they bid goodbye to Anko, who went to sleep for the next day's training, Naruto looked at Jiraiya, and finally, grabbed the courage to ask the sanin, Uncle Jiraiya, do you know why I've been abandoned? At the question, the sanin sighed, before letting his sad gaze linger on the boy's face. Ruffling his hair, without saying another word, the toad hermit simply dashed off, leaving a perplexed and alone boy to think about the recent action of the toad sanin. Why wouldn't he answer him? Because he knows, and he won't answer anyone less than the Hokage. That's why, Naruto bitterly thought. As he reached for his apartment, he too had sleep to take on. After all, he'd end up training next day too. At least, he hoped Orochimaru-sensei would take some of his time to teach him something. As he drifted off to sleep, he found himself with his back against a soft surface, a soft warm surface, that always seemed to be his mattress, since, no matter where he was, when he slept, he always had this soft warm surface under his back, always making him feel peaceful, at least in his sleep. So he slept, happily and without worries, not even wondering why it felt ticklish or furry. He never questioned it, since he didn't want to break the dream. He simply slept. Light snoring, peaceful light snoring, was always heard in his dreams, so why would he worry about that? Meanwhile, she finally went to bed, Kushina muttered, her eyes showing dark blue bags underneath them, from the lack of sleep, or the energy deprivation, one of the two. She's a bundle of energy, isn't she? Minato replied with a small smile, as, in the living room, the two sat close, sighing. You know she no longer, Kushina whispered, with a sort of hopeful and saddened tone. No, it's still too dangerous, Minato replied, shaking his head. I have doubts about Orochimaru too. He's showing a too healthy interest in the QB recently. As he muttered that, Kushina's face narrowed. You think he's realized something? No, he didn't seem puzzled in seeing Jiraiya, Minato replied. Well then how did his first time out of the village go? There was bloodshed. Obviously Orochimaru butted in, claiming nothing happened. I could have managed to get Naruto kicked out of the shinobi program. But that damn snake bastard clashed against it. All the planning with Danzo gone to waste, Minato muttered. There were a couple of root members in the gang, but Orochimaru killed them all without care. And the root retrieval team was found slaughtered in the forest. The sanin did all that without the kids realizing it. Well, what about IWA instead? Seems they're trying to get their hands on Katsumi, but they no longer give a damn about Naruto. After all, I disowned him, and I made it clear I wouldn't even waste a Ryo getting him back. I even offered him straight to the IWA Kage and he actually refused it. As Minato said that with a smug smile, Kushina's eyes turned sad, for a brief moment. He's still an Uzumaki, right? Kushina whispered, thoughts dashing through her head. I'll have to check in the clan's laws, but if he did, let's say, shed blood, he's an adult, which means that, as his clan's matriarch, I can force him out of the shinobi program. As realization dawned on her, Minato's face turned to a frown. There's no proof he actually killed anyone, and assassination missions are for chunins only. As he pointed that out, Kushina's smile turned into a smug look. Then just send him on one. At that, Minato was the one puzzled. Naruto, on a chunin rank mission? He'd die certainly, but the red-haired woman shook her head. Not alone. Send him with a 4-team squad, hand-picked, and have them ordered to let Naruto handle the deal. He'll probably hate me till the end of his life, his long, civilian life. But he won't be a shinobi any longer, unless he magically happens to get into another clan who can reverse my sentence. And with that, Minato mulled the thought, before nodding to himself. He did complete a lot of D-rank mission, so, a couple of C-rank missions more, then I'll send him on his first B-rank assassination mission, and then you can swoop him out of the shinobi program. As he finished speaking, Kushina snuggled closer to her husband. And then, once he's out, I'll have him brought into the civilian orphanage, and from there he should be fed and taught how to be a civilian, while Danzo's root will keep a close eye on him. As Minato added that, the plan seemed pretty solid into his mind. The only problem was if Orochimaru would intervene once more, or if anyone else who knew the truth would object. He just hoped Hiruzen would be fine with it too. The old man did dote on the boy, but if it was told to the ex-Hokage that it was for his own good, how could he actually say no?